Hello, everybody. This is Mentor Lawyer. This is my first video about this case. I'm basically going to be learning about the case with you guys. This, of course, involves the shooting and death of Doug Benefield, who was in his 50s, by his much younger wife, former ballerina and model, Ashley Christina Benefield. This happened in Central Florida back in 2020, and they both shared a child. She was charged with second-degree murder. The case was supposed to go to trial this year, but her attorneys, which, by the way, one of them has a connection to the Dan Markel case. So her attorneys filed a motion to dismiss. They wanted the case dismissed on the basis of Florida's stand your ground laws. An evidentiary hearing was held. The state of Florida presented its evidence to try to overcome this defense of immunity from prosecution based on self-defense. The trial court found that the state of Florida met its burden and therefore would allow the case to proceed to trial. And then her attorneys filed a petition for writ of prohibition and writ of certiorari in the Second District Court of Appeals in the state of Florida. And the case is now pending at the appellate court. The appellate court will decide whether or not, number one, whether she's entitled to immunity because the state of Florida failed to meet its burden of proof at the evidentiary hearing. That's the first argument. And then the second argument is, well, even if the appellate court is not willing to go that far, they're arguing that the trial court applied the wrong law, and they're asking the case to be remanded to the trial court for a new evidentiary hearing. And so that's where the case is pending right now, at the Second District Court of Appeals. So in essence, the trial is on hold. The appellate court will have to decide the appeal. I'm not going to give you a concise summary of the case, but we're going to read through the factual allegations from the two sides. We're going to read the factual allegations from the defense side, which of course will have accusations of prior domestic violence by the victim, by the person who died, and allegations that he was attacking the defendant when she acted in self-defense in fear of her own life and killed him, and it was by gunshots. And on the other hand, we're going to see the description of the facts by the state of Florida. I'm really just learning about the case. I may make mistakes when I'm talking about the people involved. Just going to try to read through the facts with you guys and start to think about the case, because legal commentary is not something that you can do without deep preparation and deep thought. So the first stage of any legal analysis is to try to learn the facts. So I'm going to try to learn the facts from both sides here. Ashley did not submit herself to an interrogation, so there's not going to be an interrogation of Ashley. We'll do our own deep dive. So if you're interested in this case, and it sounds like a pretty interesting case, tragic, of course. There's a child involved. There's allegations of domestic violence that may or may not be true. And a lot of things for a jury to eventually decide if the case goes to a jury, which seems to be the direction that this is going. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you guys the petitions that I obtained exclusively on this channel. I don't think anyone else has shown them. So you'll see. First, we'll go with the defense's side of the story. I'm going to share the petition filed in the Second District Court of Appeals, and we're going to go straight to the facts section, and I'll just read it to you guys. So here's the petition. Case is pending in the Second District Court of Appeal. The petitioner is Ashley Benefield, the defendant respondent, the state of Florida. The title is Petition for Writ of Prohibition, or in the alternative, Writ of Certiorari, from the Felony Division of the Circuit Court of the 12th Judicial Circuit in and for Manatee County, Florida. As you can see here, the attorney who filed this petition is David Oscar Markus. For those of you familiar with the case, you will know that this guy, I think he was representing Charlie early on in the murder of Dan Markel case. And I think that he's the one who people were saying had shared an office with Christopher the Ghost. So in any case, let's go into the statement of the case and facts. That's going to be on page 3. Here are the two arguments, right? So number one is the state failed to meet its burden of proof to overcome its Benefield's claim of immunity by clear and convincing evidence. And the second argument is the trial court erred in disregarding the facts alleged in the motion to dismiss and the attachments thereto, and improperly shifted the burden to Ms. Benefield to prove her case and rebut the state's evidence. Let me give you a little bit of background about the actual order, what the judge did. So what the judge did is he described the stand your ground laws in Florida and the procedures that are supposed to be followed when a defendant is trying to raise that as a defense and raises the issue of self-defense. So what the judge said is this, that the defendant has to file a motion, and in essence, all the defendant has to do is allege self-defense, almost nothing else. Doesn't have to swear. It does not have to be a sworn motion. But in essence, so long as they raise the issue of self-defense, pretty much it then shifts the burden to the state of Florida to prove by clear and convincing evidence that the defendant is not entitled to the defense of immunity or self-defense. And so what happened was there was a stipulation before the hearing between the state of Florida and the defense that the allegations in the motion to dismiss by Ms. Benefield's attorney on her behalf were sufficient to meet that prima facie case, the essential elements of the defense of self were alleged. There was a stipulation to that issue, and then an evidentiary hearing was set, and the state of Florida presented evidence. What the judge did in ruling and denying the motion to dismiss is he says, look, there was a stipulation that the petition was sufficiently pled to open the courthouse door to this whole issue of immunity. However, the defense failed to introduce any evidence at the evidentiary hearing. And even all the stuff that was included on that petition, all the attachments thereto, where they were making all these allegations about the prior history of violence of the victim in the case, none of that was ever entered into evidence during the evidentiary hearing. So in essence, the trial judge says, I'm not going to consider all of that. I'm in essence only going to consider the evidence presented by the state and the cross-examination. So whatever evidence was introduced at the hearing, he'll consider. And in essence, the judge evaluated the evidence and ruled in favor of the state, saying that they had established by clear and convincing evidence that Ms. Benefield was not entitled to immunity from prosecution, and therefore left the issue for the jury to decide ultimately about whether or not this was self-defense. And then, of course, that's when the defense attorneys filed this petition, which pretty much stops the prosecution at the trial court level and now moved it to the Second District Court of Appeal, where this petition is being considered. Let's go to the allegations of the facts. Let me do the introduction very briefly, and then I'll go to the facts. So introduction, the Stand Your Ground immunity statute was enacted for cases like this. Petitioner Ashley Benefield was physically attacked in her home by Douglas Benefield, her estranged husband. Estranged means that they were kind of going through a separation, divorce. A man 30 years her senior with a terribly violent history. After she had told him to leave, in fear of her life, she justifiably defended herself and shot him. Ms. Benefield was charged with second-degree murder. She filed a motion to dismiss, claiming entitlement to pretrial immunity under Florida's Stand Your Ground law. Following the state's stipulation that Ms. Benefield's motion established a prima facie case of self-defense, the trial court conducted an evidentiary hearing. Despite the stipulation, the state argued that it need not address the facts in the motion or even attempt to disprove those facts. The circuit judge, Matt White, entered an order denying Ms. Benefield's motion without consideration of the evidence included in Ms. Benefield's motion. Even though the state failed to present any evidence disproving the assertions set forth by Ms. Benefield, the trial court found that the state had met its burden of establishing that she is not entitled to immunity from prosecution. This was error. And again, we're reading now the petition filed by the defense. So these are all allegations by the defense. All right, we're going to skip this section, and then we're going to go to the statement of the case and facts. Ashley and Douglas Benefield married in 2016 following a whirlwind romance. At the time of the marriage, she was 24 years old and he was 54. They married within 13 days of meeting each other. Unfortunately, the relationship deteriorated rapidly, in large part due to Mr. Benefield's temper and violent outbursts. Ms. Benefield left their marital home in August of 2017 and moved in with her mother. Ms. Benefield had made plans to move to Maryland with her mother and the daughter she shared with Mr. Benefield. Mr. Benefield also planned to move to Maryland, but was not going to be living with Ms. Benefield. On the evening of September 27, 2020, Mr. Benefield arrived at Miss Benefield's home in a U-Haul truck in advance of her upcoming move to Maryland. Miss Benefield's mother and daughter had left the home to walk to the neighborhood park, while Miss Benefield was in the garage packing items into boxes. Mr. and Miss Benefield briefly spoke about the packing, with him moving boxes into the truck and her packing items into the garage. Miss Benefield described his mood as consistent with prior history: happy, hyper, and animated, arms and leg flailing at one moment, then agitated, sullen, and intimidating the next, annoyed that they had not already moved, with fixed, intense stares at her. They discussed how the furniture should be loaded into the truck, and in order to unload Miss Benefield's belongings first, since they would be living in separate places in Maryland. Mr. Benefield became annoyed by the discussion, expressing frustration and anger by stating, "It should not be at your house. It should not be a your house, my house arrangement. We're moving together as a family, making a fresh start, but you are dividing us." According to Miss Benefield, things began to escalate immediately thereafter. Mr. Benefield exclaimed that it was time she began acting like a wife, or else he would have to pack her in the pod, a large storage container. Sounds like Henry Steiger. Sounds like what Henry Steiger did to Miss Robinson. Miss Benefield took this as a threat in retaliation for her lack of submission, as this was not the first time he had made such a statement to her. He had on several prior occasions stated, "If you do not cooperate, I will ship you in the pod, and you won't like it because it will be hot and slow. If you're going to be difficult, you're going to go the slow way to Maryland." Keep in mind, people, I'm reading the defendant's allegations, and of course, the decedent cannot respond to these allegations, but we're going to also see what the state of Florida wrote. So right now, we're looking at the defense side of the story. Mr. Benefield then stated that he needed to make room in the pod, despite the fact that the pod had been rented by Miss Benefield's mother to transport her and Miss Benefield's household belongings. Miss Benefield told him that the pod was full to the brim. Mr. Benefield still tried to gain access to the locked pod, demanding the key and insisting that Miss Benefield unlock it. She denied having the key or knowing where it was, which angered Mr. Benefield and caused him to move in close to her, arms crossed while glaring at her. Miss Benefield stated that he grew tense, his shoulders were raised, fists clenched, heavy breathing, with sharp, derisive comments spewing at her. She was concerned for her safety, and in an attempt to protect herself, she moved away from him and resumed packing. Mr. Benefield became increasingly aggressive and threatening. He began to hover intimidatingly over Miss Benefield while she was bent over packing boxes. Miss Benefield feared that he was going to lash out as his fists were clenched and his arms twitched as if getting ready for physical contact. Miss Benefield told Mr. Benefield that she was exhausted and finished for the day in an effort to put an end to the situation. Mr. Benefield, nevertheless, continued packing. Mr. Benefield body-checked Miss Benefield at least twice. The first incident occurred when he was walking through the living room, and the contact was sufficient to cause her to lose her footing and almost fall. At this point, Miss Benefield noticed that he was clearly hostile and that his contentiousness was escalating quickly. The second incident occurred back in the garage, as Miss Benefield continued to emphatically state that she was finished packing for the day. Again, Mr. Benefield made physical contact with her as he grumbled about her being difficult. In yet another effort to de-escalate the situation, she apologized to him. Then, Mr. Benefield's aggression escalated. They were passing each other in the hallway of the house while Mr. Benefield was holding a medium-sized box. As Miss Benefield stepped to the side, Mr. Benefield drove the box into her side in an upward motion, causing her considerable pain and scratches to the side of her abdomen, as reflected in the photographs attached to the motion. Miss Benefield continued in her efforts to end the confrontation. She entered the child's bedroom to show Mr. Benefield that there was little left to pack. He stood at the doorway and blocked her exit as he puffed his chest, clenched his fists and glared at her. Trapped and frightened with nowhere to go, she backed up. Mr. Benefield then began shouting that he knew what she was doing and accusing her of trying to force him to leave and get rid of him. He continued shouting that he was not leaving and that he could stay and spend the night if he wanted to because he was her husband. Mr. Benefield momentarily stepped out of the doorway, allowing Miss Benefield to exit the room where she headed to the front door. Mr. Benefield approached right behind her, grabbed her left hand, yanking her back, and shouted, "Where do you think you're going?" as he swung her around so that his back was towards the front door, blocking her pathway. He aggressively exclaimed, "You can't leave me." Miss Benefield proclaimed in response, "I'm done. You need to leave now." Terrified, Miss Benefield then braced for imminent physical contact, which is precisely what occurred. Mr. Benefield raised his right hand with a closed fist and drove his knuckles into the temporal area of Miss Benefield's face as he exclaimed, "I am not done." Miss Benefield stumbled in sharp, numbing pain and fled to her bedroom. At this point, Miss Benefield believed that her life was in danger. As Miss Benefield entered her bedroom, she unsuccessfully tried to close the door behind her. She ran to the west corner of her bedroom where she kept a storage bin on top of her laundry basket. Inside the storage bin was a legally owned firearm. As she retrieved the firearm, she heard the sound of the door bounce off the doorstop. She turned around to see an angry Mr. Benefield standing in the doorway of the bedroom. Pointing the firearm at him, she nervously ordered him, "Stop!" Unfortunately, Mr. Benefield did not stop. Instead, he postured himself in what Miss Benefield described as a mixed martial arts fighting stance and started to advance towards her. Terrified and believing that she was going to suffer great bodily harm, she fired the gun. She frantically moved to put more distance between them as Mr. Benefield continued to advance towards her. She continued firing. As Miss Benefield explained, in what seemed like slow motion, she saw Mr. Benefield's legs go up in the air as if his feet slipped out from underneath him, and he fell backward. Miss Benefield immediately fled her house and sought help from her next-door neighbor, John Sant. Two neighborhood residents, Amy and Herbert Carlton, were out walking their dogs at the time. In a recorded interview with law enforcement, they explained that they had reached 2 houses away from the house when they heard approximately 6 shots. Less than 30 seconds later, they witnessed a female run out of the garage, pistol in hand, screaming and yelling as she ran to the house next door and banged on the door. They described the female screaming as so bad, like a mixture of a cry and scream, possibly crying for help. Based on the manner in which she ran out of the house screaming, they believed she was worried for her life. They assumed someone was chasing her. The state charged with Miss Benefield by information with second-degree murder of Mr. Benefield. Motion to dismiss. On February 1st, 2023, Ms. Benefield filed a motion entitled Motion to Dismiss, Request for Declaration of Immunity and Incorporated Memorandum of Law, citing to all those statutes of the state of Florida, alleging that she acted in self-defense in shooting Mr. Benefield. Ms. Benefield's motion detailed and provided evidence of her marital history with Mr. Benefield, including specific incidents of violence that occurred throughout the marriage. The motion expounded upon Mr. Benefield's very well-developed physique and volatile demeanor. The motion also provided a detailed recitation of facts surrounding the events of September 27, 2020. The motion included photographs, demonstrative floor plans of her home, and 19 attached exhibits, including sworn statements of Mr. Benefield himself and other witnesses. Ms. Benefield set forth the specific prior instances of Mr. Benefield's violence, many of which were triggered by nothing more than a simple argument similar to the one transpiring on the night of September 27. The first one. Mr. Benefield fired a handgun into the ceiling of their kitchen in an effort to intimidate her. In a deposition of Mr. Benefield conducted in 2018, he admitted that he had shot a gun in their home in anger. The gun sitting in front of me, and I pulled it out of the sleeve and I shot at the ceiling. Mr. Benefield admitted that he did so simply because he was angry with her, as she had the ability to stop arguing, but didn't. Question. This is from the deposition. And she should have stopped when you told her, correct? Mr. Benefield. Any one of the 100 times I asked her to. Mr. Benefield admitted that he shot the gun to make her stop fussing. Second incident. Mr. Benefield threw a loaded gun at Ms. Benefield. Mr. Benefield also admitted under oath to throwing a loaded gun against the wall during an argument with Miss Benefield. He threw it to make her shut up. Third incident, Mr. Benefield hit their dog. Mr. Benefield admitted under oath to hitting their dog, Sully, when the dog would not do what he said. He explained, I wanted him to stop and he wouldn't. He would not stay under the table. In response to the question, he wouldn't stop either, so you hit him, correct? Mr. Benefield responded, yes, I hit my dog. Fourth incident, Mr. Benefield regularly carried a loaded concealed firearm. Or fourth fact. So Miss Benefield was aware that Mr. Benefield typically had a loaded concealed firearm on his person. This fifth fact, Mr. Benefield had been stalking Miss Benefield. Again, these are the allegations from the defense, maybe some of them based on evidence that they attached with their motion to dismiss, but never introduced at the hearing. Attached to the motion was an incident report from the Manatee County Sheriff's Office from 2019 documenting Miss Benefield's allegations that 1, Mr. Benefield had placed a tracking device on her vehicle in the past, and 2, she had seen him driving behind her on multiple occasions. Although the report stated that a tracking device was not present at the time of the inspection, the report also contained a text message from Mr. Benefield admitting that he had placed a tracker on her car. Next event, Mr. Benefield or fact, allegation. Mr. Benefield was caught by a neighbor at night standing in her backyard and peering into Miss Benefield's home. During a deposition, Miss Benefield's neighbor testified that she had seen a man standing in her backyard creepily at night, identified him by his voice as Mr. Benefield, and stated that he had been looking directly into Miss Benefield's window. Next, Mr. Benefield punched holes in the wall of their home. Mr. Benefield admitted under oath to hitting a wall in their home while arguing with Miss Benefield. He hit the wall so hard while standing in the closet that he put a hole through the sheetrock to the other side. Pictures were attached to the motion depicting the damage. Like the other incidents, Miss Benefield claimed his behavior on the fact that Miss Benefield was arguing with him, or blamed his behavior on the fact that she was arguing with him. Next, Mr. Benefield's previous marriage had a history of domestic violence. Again, I don't know if there's any proof to this, but we're reading what the defense argues. Attached to the motion was a text message sent by Mr. Benefield's former wife to Mr. Benefield, in which she referenced incidents where Mr. Benefield kicked her and held a gun to his own head in her home. The motion also described, with supporting evidence, Mr. Benefield's physique and personality. A former naval officer who was skilled in hand-to-hand combat, Mr. Benefield stood at 5'9" tall, weighed 169 pounds, and was in prime shape, as evidenced by the photographs attached to the motion depicting a very well-muscled individual who looked as if he could be a professional bodybuilder or athlete. Mr. Benefield often told Ms. Benefield that he worked for governmental agencies and trained with both active and retired special forces in hand-to-hand and close-quarters combat. He was moody and unpredictable and would all too frequently vacillate between calm and rage. Ms. Benefield maintained that she never knew what would set him off, and he would often tell her, "You haven't seen the warrior side of me, and you never want to." So then they're talking about the fact that there was a stipulation between the state of Florida and the defense. Here's what the stipulation said. The defendant's motion raises a sufficient prima facie claim of justifiable use of force under Chapter 776 for self-defense immunity from criminal prosecution, as the alleged facts set forth in the motion support the elements of self-defense in either one of those three sections. There are different ways that you can show self-defense in Florida. So they cite all three of the statutes that seem to apply. Says that the trial court then held Ms. Benefield had raised a facially sufficient claim of entitlement to immunity under Chapter 776, and the burden of proof was on the state to overcome the immunity by clear and convincing evidence. So this is the response by the state of Florida. I think you guys can see it, right? Let me just make sure. Yes, you see it. Very good. So here's the response right here. And I'm just going to go to the facts so we can hear the facts as described by the prosecution now. All right. Here are the facts according to the prosecution, according to the state of Florida. On September 27, 2020, Ashley Benefield shot and killed her husband, Doug Benefield, with a firearm. On November 16, 2020, she was charged with murder in the second degree with a firearm. Over 2 years later, on February 1st, 2023, petitioner filed an unsworn motion to dismiss, request for declaration of immunity, and incorporate a memorandum of law. At the trial court's request, the parties agreed to stipulations for stand your ground, I guess it's a typo, hearing. Petitioners, contrary to the petitioner's claim on page 43 of her petition, the state expressly agreed that the facts alleged Ms. Benefield's motion established the elements of self-defense and the blah, blah, blah. Examination of the actual stipulation between the parties shows that the state stipulated that immediately after the shooting, Ashley Benefield ran to a neighbor, John Sand's house, hysterical, and said she shot her husband because he attacked her. She still had the handgun with her. This much of Ms. Benefield's story was corroborated by neighbor John Sand. However, the state did not stipulate that the remaining allegations in the petitioner's unsworn motion to dismiss were true or constituted substantive evidence of the circumstances of the homicide, events leading up to the shooting, or the nature of petitioner's relationship with the victim. Her allegations in her unsworn motion as to how the deadly shooting occurred and the nature of her relationship with the victim are allegations, not established facts. The parties also stipulated to admission of photos of the deceased, text messages between the deceased and Ms. Benefield, and that photos of Ms. Benefield taken by crime scene technician would be admitted without further authentication or testimony of the crime scene technician. After consideration of the motion to dismiss and the stipulations, the trial court determined Ms. Benefield had raised a facially sufficient claim of entitlement to immunity under Chapter 776 for the statutes, and the burden of proof is on the state to overcome the immunity by clear and convincing evidence. The trial court held an immunity hearing on July 6 and 7, 2023. Petitioner's statement of the case and facts in the instant petition cites extensively to allegations set forth in petitioner's unsworn motion to dismiss as a fact. In its order denying petitioner's motion to dismiss issued on September 18, 2023, the trial court made extensive findings of fact supporting its denial of petitioner's motion. The court's findings of fact regarding the evidence and testimony presented at the immunity hearing are the facts relevant to this court's review of the trial court's denial of petitioner's motion to dismiss. The trial court found that while petitioner's unsworn, unverified motion to dismiss sufficiently set forth a prima facie case claim for immunity and shifted the burden to prove to the state to overcome the immunity claim by clear and convincing evidence at the evidentiary hearing, the motion could not be considered as substantive evidence that the court could consider when making findings of fact and drawing legal conclusions. The court determined that based on this finding, the court accepts the defendant's motion as sufficiently pled to open the courthouse doors for a stand your ground hearing and shift the burden to the state. But the court does not consider any of the facts alleged in the defendant's motion or its attachments unless those facts were admitted into evidence by some other means. And they're citing to the order. I read most of it. The trial court's order denying the motion to dismiss extensively summarized the testimony of each of the 8 witnesses presented by the state. The trial court specifically found the testimony of each witness credible and their testimony reliable. The following is a summary and excerpts of the trial court's extensive findings, which are especially relevant to this court's review of the trial court's denial of immunity. Findings regarding the testimony of Tommy Benefield. Tommy Benefield was the victim, Doug Benefield's cousin. He described his knowledge of Doug and Ashley Benefield's relationship. Open quotations. In addition to describing Doug as being starstruck with Ashley, Tommy Benefield shared his observations that Doug was completely in love, completely supportive, and visibly physically, you could tell by the way he treated her, took care of her. By the way, this is a cousin of the victim, Doug, who, according to the order, was closer to Doug than Doug's own brother. So they were very close. On cross-examination, Tommy Benefield was not aware of the allegations raised in the defendant's motion of Doug standing in a neighbor's yard and peering at Ashley, or allegations that Doug threw a gun. His understanding of the discharge of the gun inside of the residence was inadvertent and had no knowledge of the time frame. So I guess this is a quote from the order. As for striking the family dog, Tommy Benefield testified that both Doug and Ashley told him that Doug was wearing shorts and sitting in a chair when the family dog, which Tommy described as a big dog with big nails, jumped on Doug's lap. The dog's nails cut into Doug's leg, and Doug reacted by pushing the dog off him. Doug told Tommy Benefield that the dog's nails hurt. He was frustrated and the force of the push was more than he wanted to do to the dog. However, Doug did not say he punched the dog or knocked the dog unconscious. As for punching the walls, Doug told Tommy Benefield that he punched a hole in the wall one time out of frustration. As for domestic violence against Doug's first wife, Tommy Benefield stated that he was not aware of any such allegation. All right, so then we have, from the trial court's order, Findings regarding the testimony of crime scene technician Amanda Conlon. The trial court found the homicide took place in one of the smaller bedrooms. In considering the photographs and diagram of the residence, trajectory rods, measurements, location of spent casings, location of fire projectiles, and position of the decedent's body, it is apparent that to the court that the defendant was near an exterior wall and window facing the bedroom's door, and the victim was I guess I'm supposed to say was in the bedroom doorway to no more than a step or two inside the bedroom when the shots were fired. While there was a mattress leaning up against one wall and a few sundry items on the floor, there was no furniture or other obstruction between the bedroom's doorway and the exterior window on the opposite side of the room. Findings regarding photos of scratches and swelling above eye. The trial court found there was no competent substantial evidence admitted during the hearing to prove the nature, cause, or extent of these injuries. I'm assuming this is about Ashley's potential injuries. Yes, it is. The abdominal scratches appear superficial and are consistent with what one would expect to find after engaging in several days of packing up and moving a residence. There is no bruising or other trauma to corroborate the victim was slamming boxes into the defendant's side and body checking her with his shoulder. As for the area immediately above the defendant's left eye, the swelling in the CST photograph taken September 27, 2020 and October 1, 2020 looks the same as that seen on defendant's booking photograph taken on November 4, 2020, over 1 month later. If the swelling was acute as the result of trauma on the day of the homicide, there was no evidence admitted during the hearing to establish that fact. From the order as well, there are findings regarding the testimony of the chief medical examiner, Dr. Russell Vega. As to the gunshot wound to the right side of the chest, Dr. Vega opined that the muzzle of the firearm was to the victim's right side when the shot was taken. As to the gunshot wound to the lower right leg, given all of the evidence presented and the court's own opportunity to view the photographs of the victim's leg wound, the court does not find that the defendant was lying on the floor beneath the victim when she fired this shot, and the court does not conclude that the victim was attempting some sort of unique martial arts kick when the shot was taken. The clear and convincing evidence supports the conclusion that the shot was taken either one as the victim fell and his right leg rotated outward to expose the inside of his calf muscle to the muzzle of the firearm, not forearm, or two, as he lay on the ground with his leg in the air or on the ground with a knee bent in such a way that the inside of the calf was exposed to the muzzle of the firearm. As to the superficial injury to his right arm, the court heard how Dr. Vega relied upon his training and experience, and as he observed the wound to the victim's right arm, analyzed and considered what he saw, and reached the conclusion that the wound to the right arm was possibly from a gunshot. The trial court found that Dr. Vega's opinion regarding the injury to the victim's right arm was admissible and would be considered by the court. The trial court found that the injury to the back of the victim's head could have happened if the victim hit his head as he was falling or upon contact with the floor. As to the cause of death, considering all his findings, Dr. Vega concluded that the victim's death was caused by the bullet that transversed his chest and went through his lungs. Dr. Vega was not able to determine if the victim was immediately incapacitated and the victim could have had the ability to make purposeful movements after being shot. However, Dr. Vega stated that people who suffer similar gunshot injuries fall pretty quickly. Findings regarding testimony of crime scene technician Rich Talbot. The trial court found that Talbot testified that his findings indicated that the muzzle of the firearm was more than 3 feet from the victim when he was shot in the chest and potentially 4 or more feet away. Findings regarding testimony of Detective Warren. Regarding the time to obtain search warrant, the court does not find Detective Warren's testimony incredible based on the amount of time it took to procure the residential search warrant. Findings regarding the use of murder in the application for search warrant, the court did not find that Detective Warren does not find Detective Warren less credible because he used the word murder as referenced in sections 782.04 of the Florida statutes in his application for a residential search warrant, the argument from the other side had been that this lead detective, was jumping the gun and concluding that this was a murder, but the court explained in the order that this was a petition for a search warrant, and the detective had to list a crime. Anyway, regarding different versions of probable cause affidavit narrative, so there was allegations from the defense that the lead detective had sent different drafts to the prosecution's office and was making changes to the affidavit. So here's what the court found. Having heard the cross-examination on this issue and considered the argument of counsel, the court does not consider Detective Warren's probable cause affidavit narrative, the prior drafts of the probable cause affidavit narrative, the multiple levels of hearsay represented in the probable cause narrative, or the edits made to the probable cause narrative prior to the final version to be competent substantial evidence, and the court does not discount Detective Warren's credibility because he communicated with the prosecutor before settling on his final version. The court reviewed the final version of the probable cause affidavit narrative, and that was submitted to the court. And in light of the information learned about the case during the stand your ground hearing, the court does not find it to be misleading or incomplete so as to constitute a fraud on the court or utterly lacking in probable cause. Regarding the photographs of the defendant's body, upon meeting defendant, detective did not notice any visible physical injuries. He saw photographs of scratches at a later date. Regarding the investigation of the victim's past, the trial court found that during his investigation, Detective Warren heard about incidents where a firearm was discharged into the ceiling of a residence. The victim punched a hole in a drywall at a residence, and the victim was standing in the defendant's yard at night. On response to the state objection, the court asked defense counsel if the answers provided by the detective regarding prior incidents of threats or violence by the victim were being offered for the truth of the matter asserted, and he confirmed that they were not. As a result, Detective Warren's answers to this line of question are not considered by the court as competent and substantial evidence. Regarding the victim's cell phone, the trial court found text messages between Doug and Ashley Benefield that were properly admitted and relevant to support the state's position that there was no anger, threat, or hostility between the parties in the days leading up to the homicide and on the day of the homicide, including text shortly before the 911 call. The trial court further found that the written objective communications between the parties in the week leading up to the homicide and on the day of the homicide, including texts back and forth no more than 2 hours before the homicide, reflect normal conversations for a husband and a wife engaged in a seemingly cordial dissolution and working together to pack and move 2 residences across the country. The texts and attachments are devoid of any anger, threats, or hostility by the victim towards the defendant and support the state's position that there is no evidence to conclude that the victim's demeanor suddenly, radically, and inexplicably shifted to homicidal violence towards the defendant that would justify her use of deadly force. Findings regarding the testimony of Detective Brian Moreland. Detective Moreland testified that all of the child abuse reports made by Ashley against Doug between December 2019 and April 2020 were closed without any charges being brought. Findings regarding testimony of Dr. Broder. The trial court found Dr. Broder, a clinical psychologist, was contacted by Child Protective Services to conduct evaluations of Doug and Ashley Benefield. The trial court found that Ms. Benefield told Dr. Broder on more than one occasion that she had no intention of reconciling with Doug, and her intention, once she lived in Maryland for at least 6 months, was to appeal to child protection authorities there for help, because she wanted to block Doug from having the child. The trial court found that while she told Dr. Broder about allegations she previously made against Doug and her claims of abuse towards their daughter, Ashley never told Dr. Broder that Doug had physically harmed her or that she was afraid of being battered by him. The trial court found that even considering Ashley's accusations, Dr. Broder had never had any concerns for the safety of her or the child. During his evaluation periods, Dr. Broder had the opportunity to observe Doug alone with the child when both parents were present with the child, and his observations were positive regarding Doug's ability to be a comforting and soothing parent. The trial court further found, as Dr. Broder neared the end of his evaluation period, Ashley expressed her frustration with the system, including CPT, law enforcement, and the courts, Judge Moreland. I have appeared before Judge Moreland, by the way, and Dr. Broder, because she believed that no one was helping her to protect her child. She told Dr. Broder that she was running out of time and would have to take matters into her own hands. And then we're talking about the trial court's ruling. So I think that's enough for today. I think I deserve a little break. Probably should have made this a little bit bigger. I hope you guys were able to read what I was showing, but I did read it. I think I did okay reading it. So again, this is a new case. I'm learning about this new case. It is currently on appeal in the 2nd District Court of Appeals, state of Florida. The petition was filed already. The response was filed. A request for oral argument was made. The court hasn't set oral argument, and we're waiting to see what happens next in the appeal. I'll definitely keep track of the appeal, and I'm going to look through these documents to see whether there is more material that is worth reading. I plan to eventually, when I have the time, read all of it and then start to doing a little bit of an analysis on what issues I see. Is the defense story here credible? Are there any holes in there? And also, does the state have a good case, or what holes does it have in its case? It is always tragic when something like this happens between people that share a child. It's obviously horrible for the child now. She's going to have no daddy, and if she's convicted, no mommy around. And that's going to be pretty bad for the little child. So just another horrible case from the state of Florida. We seem to have plenty of those here. And I'm glad that you were here to check out my first video on this subject. Obviously, we don't take any sides. Our coverage of the case will be objective. We're going to evaluate the arguments from both sides and see what happens. I can tell you that from the order of the trial court, in a sense, the denial of the stand your ground motion to dismiss was in part, at least according to the judge, due to the failure of Ashley's defense attorneys of presenting evidence. So it looks like the defense attorneys could have done more to defend Ashley and obtain a dismissal for her if they were able to enter those items into evidence established by some actual proof, the allegations that they make in their unsworn motion to dismiss. But that didn't happen. So in one sense, one of the things that hopefully will come out of this appeal and it is sort of an appeal, it is also a writ of prohibition is always called an original proceeding in the appellate court, but it is kind of an appeal. So in lay terms, let's call it an appeal. But the bottom line is, hopefully, at a very minimum, there's going to be more clarity about the Florida stand your ground laws and about what burden the defense has after the state has presented its evidence and argument in favor of overcoming the alleged self-defense immunity, the stand your ground immunity. So if the prosecution presents its evidence at the evidentiary hearing, should the defense now have to also to try to change how the court evaluates the state's evidence, right? So what the petition is trying to do here is to say, listen, when we file a motion, it doesn't matter if it is sworn, unsworn, whether the attached evidence has been introduced into evidence at the hearing. Here, there was even a stipulation, they argue. So the court erred, argues the defense, in not considering all the stuff that was included in the petition and in the attachments. And the judge, in essence, said, look, if you want me to consider anything after you open the doors for an evidentiary hearing on the issue of the immunity, if you wanted to present any actual evidence for me to evaluate as I evaluate the state's evidence and consider whether they met their burden, you should have presented it at the hearing. So at a minimum, I think there's going to be some more clarity about the stand your ground laws in Florida.
So I've been really keeping in touch with her, even throughout the time after giving this report, because I was very concerned at the conclusion of the evaluation as to how April 2020. I'm sorry, I don't know what freaking year it is. I've known her a little over 6 months.
Okay.
The question that they had wanted answered was, is there something wrong with Ashley? There was CPS investigations based on child abuse reports that were coming in, suspicion of abuse of Emerson. They came in from All Children's Hospital, Emerson's pediatrician, a couple of mental health professionals that the family had contact with. Everyone was very concerned that Emerson was being abused, and believed that Doug was the offender.
Okay.
So for whatever reason, CPS didn't see it that way. And you'll see in my report, I identified some factors as to why that may be. I think that a lot of the data that they were looking at was being filtered through an impression that he had given them of Ashley. There had been an injunction hearing in family court about a year and a half prior, and Diana Moreland, Judge Moreland, had made some statements at the conclusion of that hearing. He would play the tape, he told me. I spoke to Doug Benefield for about 90 minutes as part of this evaluation.
Okay.
I asked him one question: why do you think the department would want a mental health evaluation of your wife? And he proceeded to give me 90 minutes of data. Very overblown, very untrue.
Okay.
And some very highly suspicious things that he said while he was talking to me.
Okay.
And I just sat and listened. But regardless, he told me he played the tape of Judge Moreland's ruling, asked me if I had it, if I heard it, and I did, and I listened to it. It was very much out of context in terms of if you read the transcript of the whole hearing.
Okay.
But regardless, it was 18 months prior to any child abuse reports. And I guess what I had a hard time understanding was, regardless of what Judge Moreland thought during that injunction, what does that have to do with reports coming in 18 months later
Right.
of suspected abuse of a child? Apples and oranges, in my opinion. But regardless, Hope Family Services gave her some referrals for a mental health evaluation, and she called me and made an appointment, and that was how I met her.
Okay.
So-
you said that was in April
This
of
was in April of 2020. So this
2020.
is
Okay,
Right.
so you've only known her for a few
I've known her
months
about
then?
6 months.
6 months. Okay.
Yeah. A lot has happened in 6 months.
Yes, ma'am.
So she came in, and the question that I obviously wanted to address was, is there some kind of a mental health disorder that's causing her to be unnecessarily fearful of her daughter's safety? Another issue that supposedly came up was that one of the detectives or the sergeant had allegedly told Mr. Benefield that she probably has Munchausen by proxy and she's abusing this kid herself.
So one of the detectives that was investigating that, you think, told...
Mr. Benefield told me that he said that. He said, Detective
okay.
Moreland said she has Munchausen and you should go for full
Gotcha.
custody.
Okay.
I said, oh, now he's a psychologist and a
Well,
family law attorney. He's a highly accomplished detective.
It just, those other detectives that are, they're not in any way involved in this investigation. This is our unit, and,
I understand.
and that's it. Just so you
I
know.
understand, yeah,
Okay.
that's fine. I mean, it was what it was, and that's what he
Right.
said, so I took it with a grain of salt. However, Kim
Right.
Donatelli verified that as well. So I'm
Okay.
like, okay, I wanted to understand what's going on with
No,
it.
and that's why we come to you guys, because we want to know what your professional opinion is,
Right.
and so we can document it appropriately and not go by someone who doesn't have a degree in this.
I mean, I can let you take this with you when I'm done.
Okay.
But basically, I looked at, she provided a great deal of data for me. Much of what she told me, I very strategically left the details out of the report. I
Okay.
did not trust CPS not to hand it to Doug Benefield. It
Okay.
was very clear that he had developed a rapport with them and was relating to these individuals more like a friend than somebody who was being investigated for a crime.
Okay.
This was one of Kim's biggest concerns, that they're in a staffing meeting and they're referring to him as Doug.
Right.
And supposed to, like, wait a minute, you do realize you're supposed to be investigating him for child abuse. The boundary made her very nervous. And I'm like, okay, well, if that's how it is, I really need to be very careful what I put in here, because if he's told about what's in here and there is child abuse or domestic violence going on, it's going to put these two in much, much more danger.
Okay.
So I'm communicating with Ashley. We probably talked about 2.5 hours during the first interview. My clinical impression, she was very normal. Nothing off-putting, nothing. Now, usually with personality disorders, I don't know if you're familiar, histrionics, borderlines, people who they don't have a disease like schizophrenia or bipolar that could be treated with medicine. It's more like their view of the world is kind of distorted.
Okay.
I always say a personality disorder is like looking at life through someone else's eyeglass prescription. They just don't see things right.
Okay.
Later on, when I had spoken with Mr. Benefield, he described Ashley as being very severely borderline at best. That's a pretty powerful statement, because borderlines are a real pain in the ass. It's marked by a real pervasive pattern of instability in relationships. People may love them when they first meet them, but it's not long before they realize, oh my God, these people are freaking crazy.
Okay.
You can't win with a borderline. And what I mean by that is they always need to make themselves a victim. They cannot take any responsibility for any behavior. They incessantly have this love-hate connection with people. It's I hate you, oh please don't leave me. They're very needy, they're very codependent, they exhaust people. They just exhaust them. Being around them is literally exhausting. So when you work in mental health and you've met a few of them, you can kind of start smelling them out in the waiting room. And clinically, in my clinical practice, they don't last with me because I'm very direct, I'm very straightforward. I tell people, look, you're responsible for your thoughts, your behavior, your emotions. You're not responsible for anyone else's.
Right.
So focus on you. They can't handle that. They take responsibility for everyone else's thinking, feeling, and behaviors and none of their own, which is why they're perpetually emotionally disturbed. These people are known for frequent self-harming. They're the ones who tend to do a lot of cutting. They have a higher suicide risk than people with other problems. So it's not difficult to figure out if somebody has these behavior patterns.
Okay.
You can generally see it in a conversation if you know what to look for. And you also want to look at their relationships with others because that will definitely tell you. Plus a personality inventory will give some indicators.
So I know Doug told you that. Did you see any of those patterns in
Nothing.
Ashley? Okay,
I
so you
saw
didn't see
nothing with
anything that would lead you to believe she was even a borderline case of anything?
Nothing
Okay.
to think that she had any mental health disorder
Okay.
in terms of our communication. So clinically, she presented very well. The other thing I noticed about her that I didn't realize quite how significant it was until weeks and months had gone by. And even now, I mean, I still communicate with her every day.
Okay.
I watched this case very, very carefully because I knew at one point I'd probably have to testify in another restraining order injunction. But one thing that I noticed about her is she had never called Doug any kind of name or said anything derogatory about him. She'd report his behavior. Like, oh my God, I can't believe he did this, or this is what happened today,
Right.
or he does this and this. She described his behaviors, but she never labeled him. And people who have personality issues, people who have mental health issues, they're labelers. They'll say, oh, he's such a narcissist, or oh, he's a psycho, or oh, he's a pervert. She never called him a name. She never put a label on him. She only described his behavior. And I've never heard her say anything about anybody else that's overtly negative. Like, she's direct. And she'll directly say how she sees someone behaves or what she thinks about it. But she was never attacking towards him. So this idea that she would be lying about him abusing her, it just isn't congruent with that at all. It's very inconsistent that she would have any kind of ill will or would want to misrepresent what he was doing to the child. The other theory, of course, was the parental alienation theory. Was she making this up because she didn't want to share the baby with him? I've dealt with lots of parental alienation cases. I mean, I've been qualified as an expert in Circuit 12 and 13 on parental alienation. I have judges specifically ordering me to do evaluations on those situations. So again, that's another one I could kind of smell from the parking lot. And they often have personality disorders. So it's pretty easy. They often kind of go hand in hand. But if you know the behavior patterns, you can generally sniff it out fairly quickly. Nothing that would indicate an alienating agenda. When the judge ordered time sharing, she never withheld the child. And she never said anything bad about him, which alienating parents always do. So I'm noticing all this as I'm asking her questions and she's telling me about their relationship. So she gives me a narrative, really, of their relationship history. They got married after knowing each other 13 days. So it was a real whirlwind romance. He presented himself very much as everything that she ever wanted. And again, I didn't realize this at the time, but as weeks and months went by, I started to suspect that he had profiled her, that he knew who she was before they met.
Okay.
And he was very cognizant to present himself as the person she wanted him to be. And you'll understand why, and I think it'll be more clear when you read my report. But in their current situation at the time, they were separated. When he started his time sharing with Emerson, shortly after, so it was about 2 years ago now, she was about 6 months old when he would have been starting the time sharing. 3 weeks after Judge Moreland ruled he can have it, he didn't do anything, didn't ask for any time. When he came to pick up Emerson, Ashley said, oh, I'll go with you guys. Great. She went with them. Soon he wasn't wanting Emerson to come along. Grandma would watch Emerson. He would pick up Ashley, he'd take her to lunch, they'd go to a ballet class, they'd go to the beach. They'd go to dinner, they'd go to a movie, he'd come over the next day, pick her up, maybe he'd say hi to the baby for 10 minutes if she was finishing getting ready. He wanted to be with Ashley.
Right.
What I've learned throughout the course of this is Emerson was the instrument that kept Ashley in his life. He was obsessed with her. If you've looked through his phone, which I trust you have, God's crown jewel is nicknamed for her. And that's really at what he saw her as, the creme de la creme. Where was he going to find another Ashley? She's beautiful, she's smart, she's 30 years younger, she was literally the trophy on his arm. She gave him credibility. She made him look good. And Emerson was the key to keep her in the game. When you have a kid with somebody, it cements you for life.
Did she ever mention whose idea the child was? Like to reverse the
She
vasectomy?
wanted to have a baby, obviously. I mean, she was
I just
young
didn't
and
know
wanted
if
to
she
be a
ever
mom.
mentioned that
He very
he
much
decided.
said, oh, he was all over it. He wanted to have oodles of children. He wanted to have other kids.
Okay.
He very much wanted to have a baby with her simply because that could keep her in the game.
Right.
If you don't have a child with someone and you get divorced, hasta la vista, baby, you're out the door. So the idea of having a child with her would always keep her around. The idea was very appealing. But I think she also wanted a child. Number one, she wanted to be a mom.
Right.
And she's a wonderful mother. Number two, she did what a lot of women do in relationships where there's coercive control. They think that by having a baby, being a family, she loved him. I mean, she wanted to be happy with him. And okay, we'll be a family, we'll be happy. Ashley, what I've learned about her was that she's very optimistic about people. She really believes the best in people. As this situation was escalating, like in the last few days of his life, he was becoming increasingly more scary and aggressive. He hadn't been allowed inside Ashley's mom's home. That was her safe place. He wasn't welcome there. The last few months he became increasingly agitated that he was not welcome there. Well, of course, they were staging this move to Maryland. And I say staging because her mother actually has a home there. The intention was not for her and Doug to move there together.
Right.
There were a lot of things behind the Maryland thing, and I'll get into that in a minute. But there was furniture that needed to be put on the truck, and he was insistent on coming over and helping. And she's like, okay. She was in that rock and a hard place. She had a hard time saying no to him because he'd get mad. And keep in mind, he still has his time-sharing rights with Emerson. So if she pisses him off, fine, I'll just take Emerson for the weekend. Once he started seeing Emerson alone, because she couldn't keep up this front of wanting to be with him, they were having marriage counseling with Dr. Sharon Forrest. And I spoke to her a little bit for the purposes of the evaluation, and she really learned a lot of very ugly things about what was happening in that relationship as well, but Ashley could only keep it up for so long. Once she made it clear after about a year or so that we're not going to reconcile, he started exercising his Emerson time sharing. That was when the physical abuse started. Well, okay, Ashley suspecting him of abusing her, one would think, oh, I'll come with you.
Right.
She wasn't doing that. The abuse escalated. It kept escalating until it got to a point where Ashley was ready to lose her mind. Dr. Broder was in the midst of his investigation at this point. Dr. Broder was the one that CPS wanted her to have a second evaluation with because my findings did not say she was crazy. I guess that didn't work for them.
Right.
So they bring in Broder, which is perfectly fine. He does CPS evaluations a lot. Excellent. Good. 2 people will say she's clearly not crazy. It turned into a social eval with him. I mean, he evaluated Doug. He was observing them with Emerson. This went on for many, many months. I'm getting ahead of the game, but by early July, she was really ready to lose her mind. The consequences of the abuse on Emerson, she couldn't do it anymore. The logical solution, put herself in the middle again.
Right.
I'll go with you guys. And sure enough, he picked it right back up. He was coming over, wanting to take her out. Okay, I'll go to dinner. Emerson was very afraid of him. Mommy would get picked up. Where's mommy? Where's mommy? Grandma would say, she's out with daddy. Okay. She's out with daddy, so you can stay home with Mimi. Okay. And that was really what it was. She'd go out with Doug. She's pretending to reconcile, pretending that everything is fine. Oh, maybe we can work this out. We can call off the divorce. The move to Maryland, supposedly he got this new government job, which I don't even know if that's true or not, but because her mom has a house there and she grew up in Annapolis, they have family, she has friends there. Her thought was, Maryland is probably a better state for me to live in to protect my daughter. A, we have family support. B, they do have better social services there. It's a very democratic state. They're very much more into protecting victims as opposed to protecting people's rights.
Right.
I lived in Gaithersburg, Maryland briefly. The difference in domestic violence services, she'd be more likely to be believed. She'd be less likely to have a judge who minimized domestic violence. And I will tell you this, I will go on record saying I have the ultimate respect for Judge Moreland. I've testified in her courtroom, variety of different cases. I find her to be very straightforward and to generally make pretty good decisions. She really missed it on this one because I don't think she had a real understanding of pervasive, chronic, power-controlled domestic violence issues. I think like a lot of people, she sees it the way it is on TV shows. The guy in the sleeveless t-shirt standing out in the driveway screaming with a beer in his hand. And that is just not how people present when they're, especially if they're educated, if they're kind of polished. They put on a very good, charismatic appearance for other people, but you never know what's going on behind closed doors.
Right.
And the manipulation, the intimidation, the coercion can be very, very subtle. But he was very aggressive. In terms of Ashley, though, nobody ever identified any mental health pathology. She was seeing the mental health staff at Hope Services. Nobody found anything with her. She had no psychiatric history. Her medical health was always good, no organic issues. She was a professional dancer. She had a sodium insufficiency at one point. It was corrected with Gatorade and pretzels. Family history, healthy. No history of schizophrenia, mental illness, personality disorders. Actually, they all sound like, pretty normal, well-functioning people. She was very well-functioning throughout her life. She was really swept off her feet by Doug. And he very much wanted to get married, which now he tells other people she pushed it, but he told me on the phone he very much wanted to marry her. Then he said that was a big mistake. Well, yeah, okay. And I'll get into my conversation with him later. Shortly after she moved to Charleston, which was where he lived, she went on a cruise with her mom and her best friend because they had bought the cruise tickets months before. And she was texting him on WhatsApp whenever they were in port or she can get cell service.
Right.
And that was when she first started seeing indicators of his violent behavior. He texted her one night saying he was in a murderous mood and was just saying very ugly and coercive things, expressing being very jealous that he wasn't there and people are looking at you. And her responses, just very sweet, very loving, very reassuring. He was very aggressive when she came home. He started throwing things, smashing things. He would push her, he would trip her. A lot of intimidation, a lot of breaking things. They'd be in the car, he would pull a radical U-turn, drive up on the curbs. He abused their pets. He threw her cat down the stairs, punched the dog hard enough to knock him unconscious. If she was petting the dog while they were talking, he'd kick the dog. And then he'd say, well, it's not my fault, I have PTSD, which again, he played her empathetic nature. That made her want to pull in closer and want to help him. He fired a gun in the house before. He put it to his head at one point, I'm going to kill myself, because she said she was leaving him. He puts the gun to it. She turns around and runs towards him. Who the hell runs towards somebody with a freak? I'd be like, fine.
Right.
Fuck that. No, she runs towards him. He really played on her compassionate nature, and it worked. It worked. And then he'd have his periods of time where he was very sweet. She wanted things to be good, wanted things to get better. She stayed in the game. She learned that his wife had died only, I think, a couple of months earlier.
8 or 9 months, something like that.
Yeah, like she had no idea that she had just died. He also didn't tell their daughter that he was getting married.
Right.
So that was kind of weird. His daughter definitely had some issues. The way she describes Eva, it sounds to me like she's got a borderline personality.
Okay.
And it also sounds to me like Doug was probably sexually abusing her. She said their relationship was very love-hate. They'd either be really cuddly with her sitting on his lap, or they would just be at each other's throats. And she didn't understand that. Like, keep in mind, at this time, she's like 23 years old or whatever. She'd never seen a family dynamic like this. And of course, it's easy from the outside. I see dysfunction every friggin' day of the week, as do you, to say, what the hell was she thinking? She didn't know what the hell this mess was. But she knew she wanted to help. And again, I think he played on that. Just played on her nature and her desire to help. Oh, Eva's upset because of you. You're the problem, Ashley. And oh, you're so loving, you're so good to Eva. looking at the correspondence between them, the different emails that he would send her and to people, the text messaging to her, it was so up and down. Very much a lot of gaslighting, a lot of head games, all the stuff you see in the whole power, control, coercive dynamic. Stuff that people wouldn't see on the outside.
Right.
Because to other people, this is my beautiful wife. This is my wonderful wife. This is God's crown jewel. Telling everybody, just what godly people they are. I find that ethical people don't have to tell people that they're honest, ethical people.
Right.
Like, who the fuck does that? Who
Right.
says, hi, I'm a very honest and ethical person? Your character speaks for itself. But she's showing me emails like to these pastors when he's requesting marital counseling. Oh, Ashley and I are very solid, ethical people. To me, that's a red flag saying I'm a sketchy piece of shit. Like,
Right.
Why do you need to say that? So he presented their marriage very differently to other people. This was very powerful. Doug had told her in our interview, she shared with me, that he threatened that he can make people disappear. He told her he poisoned Renee and made her disappear. He told her the police will back him up and nobody will believe her. She believed him.
Right.
She believed him. Now, this was pretty handy that he put this in her head.
Right.
Did he actually poison Renee? I have no freaking idea. That was beyond the scope of my evaluation.
Right.
But she believed him. And so when she got sick, and she believed he poisoned her, and when she got that box of tea, do you know about the tea box?
Yeah. Well, believe me, we've read through.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, there's friggin' potpourri in the tea. Now, I understand there was no nexus saying that Doug definitely did this.
Right.
But if somebody was abusing me for years, and then I get a box of tea from them for my birthday, and there's friggin' potpourri in it instead of tea,
Right. Who else would do it?
I'm thinking to myself, that motherfucker's trying to poison me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if my best friend sent me tea, I'd say, shit, I better call Tivana and tell them their tea is poisoned.
Right.
That's just a natural way to respond. But, of course, having no real knowledge of what was going on in their home, Judge Moreland hears this and thinks you're batshit crazy. Doug plays that to people at CPS. Oh, she's the crazy one. So I see how this unfolded, but unfortunately the detectives over there didn't do their detective work. They done a little investigating and asked Ashley some questions, as opposed to assuming she was crazy. They might have had a more balanced and realistic picture of what was going on. He also incessantly accused her of affairs, which again, another dynamic in the coercive controlling relationship, because the reality is he never felt like she was good enough for him. She was a possession, she was a trophy, she made him look good, and why wouldn't she leave him? Doug is a fraud. Every area of his life was fraudulent. He was putting up a front with everything, and Ashley gave him credibility. What else? He started a ballet company, which was Ashley's dream. Little did she know this ballet really was just a money laundering operation. He only started it for the purpose of selling it. This is what this guy did. He created businesses, and he sold them. And he burned a lot of people along the way. And you guys are the detectives, so I'll let you guys find that out.
Right.
No,
But
I
from
saw some
what
articles
little
on
I've
that, but
learned,
yeah.
he's just sketchy. I mean, that's his thing. Another thing that was interesting was when I was speaking with Doug. I'll get to that in a second. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'll let you guys read this for yourselves. But it'll tie everything together, I think, in terms of what you've been trying to find out. He very much kept her afraid of what he might do. That was, I think, the most significant source of power he had over her. He would make these very veiled threats. He would tell her a lot of stories, use a lot of analogies. In the couple of months leading up to his death, he would tell her stories about, like, Al Capone knew he was going down. But before he killed himself, he made sure that, he killed his lawyers. I don't know the freaking story, but the story was, the point is, before he went down, because he knew he was going down, he took everyone else down with him. And he tells it to her just, oh, yeah, I saw a movie about that, or I heard that. But what he's really saying is, oh, if I'm going down, you're going down. And I think he knew there was problems coming. There was a restraining order injunction hearing that was set for the Thursday after he was killed.
Right.
Yes.
And he had told her weeks ago the agreement was that she would withdraw that. And she obviously didn't because she wanted to still have it on the docket. She was waiting on Brad Broder's report. Brad Broder's report, from the way it had been communicated from Dr. Broder to other individuals, was going to give very, very clear indications. He was really hoping to get Doug arrested. I really believe he wanted to get him arrested on child abuse charges.
Oh, Dr. Broder?
Wanted to get Doug arrested.
Okay.
So she's waiting with bated breath for this report to come out. And this was also part of my regular communication with her. I'm really trying to keep her encouraged. Hang in there. For all you know, the police may show up at his door tomorrow. For all you know, there could be a warrant going out today. I mean, we were all really, really hoping. Child Protective Team gets the report and they didn't release it. Now, my understanding is if they don't release a report to the parties, it's because it could potentially endanger somebody. I don't know. But I know Brad knew when the injunction hearing was. So she's hanging in there hoping that Broder's report will rescue her and that we won't have to do this hearing because she was terrified of that hearing. Terrified. The most dangerous time for somebody in a coercive, controlling relationship is when you're going to leave your abuser. That's when they go freaking apeshit. And she was really afraid that he was going to kill her. He pretty much told her in every way, shape, or form. And honestly, I'm convinced he was going to kill her. I really believe he was planning to kill her. I don't think he was planning on getting to Maryland with her. He told her a couple of times, you're going to ride up in the pod. She already paid for storage for that furniture pod. And I really think that's why he came over her house that night. Just my hypothesis. But based on everything that I've known has been happening, I think it's a pretty darn good one. But regardless, she was absolutely terrified of this injunction. We made a safety plan. Rented a hotel in St. Petersburg. The plan was she would go to her lawyer's office. She'd go out the back door. There'd be a rental car and a driver. She was worried about her cats. That's like, so Ashley, what's going to happen to my cats? I'm thinking, I'll get your cats. My family's allergic to cats. It's not like I can take them home for her. I'm thinking I'm going to have to keep these freaking cats in my office. But
I know her attorneys did provide us with some of the stuff for the safety plan, because obviously when we heard about that, we wanted to make sure that it was properly documented. And I guess you guys had some receipts
I
or
have
some
Hilton
things.
Honors rewards, so and my husband has the account, so I wanted to put it in my name.
Okay,
If he
so
was
he
looking
couldn't
for
find
her.
her.
He
Right.
couldn't find her.
So what exactly was the plan with that? How was that supposed to go down? I mean, obviously it didn't go down that way,
She was
but
going to go to her lawyer's office Monday
okay.
under the pretense of signing the paper to dismiss the injunction.
Okay.
Because Doug was really pissed on Friday. Why is that? Because his lawyer called him. Well, that injunction's still there. And meanwhile, though, Faith Brown had contacted Stephanie Murphy and said, I can't do the paperwork with Ashley till Monday. I'm out of the office Thursday. I have a funeral Friday. Like, she was putting it off so that we can put a safety plan in place.
Right.
We got Ashley a burner phone so that he couldn't, track her on her phone or anything like that. He admitted to me he had a tracker on her car, by the way.
I did see that in some of the reports. Yeah.
So the plan was she would go to Faith's office under the pretense of signing the paper to dismiss the injunction.
Okay.
We figured there was a good chance he would follow her. So there would be the rental car waiting out back. She'd go out the back door. I don't know what the plan was to get Mom and Emerson there as well, but they had something figured out. And then that he was going to, the driver was going to take them to St. Petersburg, to that hotel where they would stay. They would be driven back to the courthouse. Extra security and law enforcement was going to be brought in to escort them into the courthouse.
Okay.
And because so much had happened between the time Judge Moreland had last seen them up until that injunction hearing, we were feeling hopeful that the injunction would be granted. Not to mention the fact that she could then order Brad Broder's report, which would, I think, further, of course, support the reason for the injunction. And so then at least she'd have a protective order keeping him away from her. Did I think he would honor it? No. She had a protective order issued in South Carolina. He drove across 2 state lines and would stand outside her mother's house. So this was one of those just a piece of paper, but my thing was, look, at least if you have that piece of paper, you can defend yourself. You can call the cops and they have to come over.
Right.
You don't have Captain Romano now saying to you, you're just using a marital spat as an excuse to make up stories about child abuse or whatever the hell it was he said to her. I quoted it in here.
Right.
The police are not going to tell you, go away, you're lying anymore, because that was pretty much what CPS was doing at that point.
Okay.
Okay, and when I say the police, I don't mean everybody in the
Yeah, I
organization,
understand.
Yeah.
but they really didn't handle this very well. She had nowhere to go. She felt like she couldn't do anything because she was the crazy one and everybody believed Doug. This injunction would have changed that, and at least would have put him in prison or jail or something if he violated it. But she was afraid to do it because she was really afraid he was going to kill her. So she's on pins and needles, really feeling like he is all powerful, and really in her life he was.
Right.
He really was, and she had very good reason to believe that her life was in danger, because it was. It absolutely was. So, I'm just trying to see if there's anything else that's significant as far as your investigation goes. I'm just trying to give you a thorough history. Her personality inventory, I did an MMPI-2 restructured format. Perfectly valid. She took it in a straightforward manner. There was only an elevation on one scale, which is Revised Clinical Scale 6. Revised Clinical Scale 6 is indicative of distress, worry, emotional distress from being persecuted in some way, or belief that somebody wanted to harm you. Now, if there's an elevation on that scale, as well as others that converge in the correct way, it could be indicative of a couple of things. It could be indicative of a paranoid personality disorder. Well, she had no elevations on any other scale. It was this alone. But what the heck? Let me try on these possibilities for size.
Right.
Paranoid personality disorder. This is the neighbor who a kid rides his bike past his yard and he says, "Damn kids riding by and vandalizing my house. Get out of here." This is the mean neighbor who thinks everyone's out to get him. I actually had one of these guys who lived behind me. They really think that everybody wants to get them. They're very angry people, very difficult to get along with. Does that sound anything like the Ashley I've been describing? No, not at all. So scratch that one. Paranoid schizophrenia. Absolutely not. She's fully reality based. No symptoms of schizophrenia ever. Just general paranoid personality. Again, she has no paranoia about anything. You don't tend to see somebody being paranoid, but it only being isolated to one particular idea.
Right.
Like, my husband will kill me if I leave him. Or CPS is not going to help me. They don't believe me. Well, there's evidence to support that. It's only paranoia if there's no evidence to support that. Now, it's paranoia if you think that, gee, I think that my neighbor is out to get me arrested and set me up for something. Set you up for what? They're going to put drugs in my car. Well, have they put drugs in your... Like, that's paranoia. Right. There's nothing to substantiate it. But this was an elevation on one scale that is indicative of distress and a feeling of persecution. No elevations anywhere else. So the only time you see a profile like that would be really three types of people. Person one, a woman or a man, in a coercive, controlling, abusive relationship where they are being hurt, plotted against, and persecuted. Two would be somebody who is dealing with the same thing but maybe in a professional situation. Like, I was sexually harassed at work, I ratted out the boss who did it, and now people at work hate me because they all love the boss and now he's getting fired.
Right.
That would potentially show that as well. The only other place you'd see it would be like if I was doing a competency evaluation and the guy was pretending to have a paranoid disorder.
Oh, okay.
And but he clearly wasn't doing a very good job.
Right.
I might see it there.
Right.
But that's it. So what it really indicated was this is a normal profile given her situation. But there was nothing wrong with her. Absolutely nothing. So I started talking to collateral informants. Tie it together by the people that she knows.
Mm-hmm.
So I talked to her friend Carly, who she's known since the beginning of high school. This completely outrules the borderline. People with borderline personality disorders can't sustain meaningful friendships. Their friendships are generally very superficial at best, and people just get damn tired of them because they burn people out. She doesn't burn people out. Everybody that I talked to, these are all upstanding Members of society, productive people who've known her in various facets. Carly's known her since childhood. Jana's known her for 5 or 6 years. Jana's like 60-something. She worked in child development. She's a local real estate person. She met her during the Trump campaign. They remained good friends ever since. Borderlines don't meet people and sustain friendships. Her physical therapist, knew her for years, worked on her bad knee from ballet. They developed a friendship. They'd go out to lunch. He was friends with her mom. Became a family friend.
Right.
People with borderline personalities don't make and keep these kinds of friendships. So this was outruling personality issues. Okay, so I look at the possible Munchausen thing. Does she meet criteria for a factitious disorder? Factitious disorders are essentially you pretend that there's something wrong with you, or you do something to hurt someone else, pretending that they're ill or they're sick because you like the attention. When mothers do it to their children, it's known as Munchausen by proxy. So in looking at that, what are the characteristics of somebody who has this kind of classic factitious disorder? The person usually has a personality disorder. Well, we've already ruled that one out. The motivation is attention from the father of the child. You'll see it in couples where the father is very distant, not necessarily, not mean or abusive, but kind of checked out, goes to work, grabs a beer, sits on the couch, watches TV, goes to bed. Says hey to the kids, maybe plays with them a little while, but isn't engaged intimately, romantically, as a friend, as a co-parent really with the wife. Will play with the kids in the backyard, but there's not a sense of connection to the wife. So what does she do? She knows he loves the kids. She's hungry for attention, pretends the kids are sick, uses that to get attention, to try to draw the husband back in. Sadly, it doesn't work. It often just harms or kills the kid. That was so the opposite of what was going on in this dynamic. She had too much of Doug's attention. He was obsessed with her. This does not fit at all. Doesn't fit in the least. The idea that somebody could even suggest that, clearly indicative that he had no clue what the hell Munchausen by proxy really is about. Right. It did not fit. I tried so hard to find something wrong with her. There was nothing wrong with her. But what I was seeing without her trying, this is another thing. She never once said, Doug is abusive. Doug abuses me. Now she said Doug is hurting Emerson.
Right.
She described what she thought he was doing to her. She never labeled him as an abusive person. And people who fake domestic abuse, they throw that around all the time. Mm-hmm. Only recently has she begun to really identify that for what it is. She's scared of him. She's admitted being afraid of him. But not that kind of stupid fear that people pretend to have. Real, raw survival fear. Not some stupid anxiety because, what might happen? No, real fear. Right. That you have of something that is truly a danger to your life and a danger to her daughters. After my evaluation, I need to see where I left off. At what point I formally, once I knew she wasn't crazy. I talked to the pediatric dentist. You'll see evidence of Emerson being afraid of the father. I talked to Dr. Forrest, who was their marriage counselor. Talked to Mr. Benefield. This was an interesting conversation. I wish I had recorded it, but I'm glad I didn't, because obviously I would have had to told him I was doing it, and he would not have been as transparent.
Right.
He's the one who likes to record things without telling people. You've probably figured that out by now, too.
Seems that way, yes.
Mm-hmm. Sketchy motherfucker. The conversation was very sketchy. I asked him about, do you think Ashley needs a mental health evaluation? Oh yeah, she's a borderline at the least, blah, blah, blah. He used terminology, and again, I didn't put the specifics in the report. I didn't want him to see it.
Right.
He used terminology like borderline and paranoid many, many, many times. He said many times, she still thinks I poisoned her. Even now, she thinks I poisoned her. He never denied poisoning her. I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
She still thinks I poisoned her. I didn't say a word, by the way. I just let him talk. And he kept talking.
Right.
And then he was getting nervous because I wasn't saying anything. And one thing Jana Martin had told me that I also didn't include in the report, because she met Doug a couple of times. She said when he's lying and he knows you can tell he's lying, he does the He does like the clear throat cough thing. So after a while, when he wasn't sure I was listening to his rant or believing him, so then I'd give him a little encouragement. I go, oh, really? Or, wow, that happened?
Right.
So now he thinks, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. He goes back confidently on his rant. He made references to pedophilia at least a half a dozen times. Ashley never called him a pedophile. Nobody else ever called him a pedophile. Now, did people think he was sexually abusing Emerson? Oh, hell yeah. But nobody ever labeled him a pedophile. And there's a difference between a pedophile and someone who sexually abuses a child.
Right.
Pedophile is someone who is sexually attracted to prepubescent children.
Right.
They may offend, they may not offend. Many do.
Right.
There are people who do have those impulses. They know they're horrible and wrong, and they hate that they have them. They're not offenders. Someone may molest a child for a whole variety of reasons. I'm a certified sex offender treatment expert as well. I didn't tell any. I mean, I'm sure he researched me when he knew who I was, but we never talked after that day because I was useless to him. CPS rejected my evaluation because it didn't support that Ashley was crazy.
Do you know when you talked to Douglas,
Mm-hmm.
was that prior to the allegations that came out about him abusing Emerson?
No,
or was that after?
It was after.
It was after because I know there was one that was a sexual abuse and there was also a physical abuse.
It was after both of them.
So it was after both? Okay.
Yeah. So he made several, and again, I didn't ask him anything about his behavior. My only question was, why do you think Ashley needs a mental health evaluation? So he's referencing pedophilia. He would say things like, this was a great statement. She admitted, not said, admitted, as if acknowledging she did something wrong. She admitted in sworn deposition to having carried a gun at Dr. Carson's house the night we met. Now let's unpack that statement. Number one, she had a carry permit.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, it was a Republican dinner. Fucking everybody had a gun.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's how they roll.
Yeah.
Everyone from the Secret Service to the person cleaning up they were all packing heat. Who the fuck are we kidding? What's the difference? It was on the East Coast. I don't drive across the state without a gun.
Right.
I will not go across Alligator Alley without a firearm. I'm not going to break down and have somebody eat my face. Like, it's just not happening. Okay. She admitted. What was there to admit? She didn't do anything. But here was the kicker. I asked Ashley afterwards, when were you deposed and for what? And what did Ben Carson's dinner and you carrying a gun have to do with it? And she said, I was never deposed. I asked her attorney, was Ashley ever deposed? No. In sworn deposition, it was a clear effort to manipulate me.
Right.
Very, very clear. And there were just many instances of that. Really, really trying to get me to see Ashley in a light and to believe things that absolutely never happened. He clearly had an agenda. Why would you have an agenda? Okay, just tell me your perception of her and why you think she needs a mental health evaluation and be done with it. 90 minutes straight of this kind of stuff. But there was one thing he never did say. And this, I think, is very, very interesting because this says a lot about his character. One of the things that Ashley had showed me or told me about when we were talking was that she found some prescriptions in her name in a box. I don't remember if it was at the South Carolina house or in Doug's apartment. I don't remember where. But they were prescriptions for opioids. I think it was oxycodone. Written by a doctor, Dr. James Yanni, who she had never seen as a patient. I said, did you know him? She said, yeah, he was a business associate at Doug's through the Evangelical Business Network thing. But I said, but you never saw him. She said, no, but he wrote her prescriptions for opioids. She saw the bottles, she took pictures of them, and she went to either Walgreens or CVS and she got the prescription printout to see who picked it up. Doug had picked it up. Her interpretation was that he did that like maybe to like set her up somehow if he ever wanted to create the impression that she had a drug problem. She's like, what other reason would he have for doing that? I said, well, how many times did he do it? I think there were only 2, maybe 3 times. I said, well, that doesn't make sense to sell them. I mean, there's no money in selling prescriptions of that volume.
No.
So that wouldn't have made sense. But what I thought was so interesting, and I said, well, did CPS send you for drug tests. Because if he's telling them you're a druggie, they'd be making you come into pee twice a week. She said no. Asked Kim Donatelli, did they say mental health or mental health substance abuse? She's like, no, I don't remember anyone saying anything about substance abuse. They just think she's crazy. 90 minutes of his rant. He never said to me, she used to have an opioid problem. Well, why wouldn't he tell me that? And that was when I realized he didn't fill that prescription for the benefit of making Ashley look like a druggie. He got that doctor to fill that prescription so he could blackmail that doctor. Because Ashley said, and I looked at his LinkedIn profile, he's linked as one of his people. He has a business relationship with the guy. What is the best way to blackmail a doctor? Get them to write a prescription for a controlled substance for someone who's not even their patient.
Yeah. Something to help him lose his license.
He could make him lose his license. And I guarantee, if you did your detective work, because I'm not going to do your job for you, I'm not even trying to do that, but for the sake of, again, understanding what was happening in this relationship, it was so very clear when I hung up with him, holy shit, this guy is just manipulative, hurtful, coercive as a person.
Right.
To anybody. Give him what he wants. He's cool with you. Refrain from giving him what he wants. You are public enemy number one. Well, now, God's crown jewel. And Ashley, she really is, she's a good girl. She's never been in trouble with the law. She's never had a mental problem. She's been an upstanding citizen. Donald Trump thinks very highly of her, thought the world of her. She worked on his campaign.
Right.
They had a very appropriate professional relationship. People love Ashley. And for good reason. She's a decent kid. She's a good person. She's a wonderful mom. She made him look very credible. And in the days leading up to his death, I don't know what else was going on in his personal life or in his business life, but I really believe his house of cards was crumbling. And he was panicking. And now his attorney reminds him that this restraining order injunction is still on the docket. And apparently he didn't know, he must have known this, but probably wasn't thinking about it. But it became clear to him again from his attorney that Dr. Broder was not just evaluating Ashley. This was a family evaluation, which he should have known because he took some personality tests.
Right.
Oh, the other fun thing was he said to Ashley, oh, I know I did great on those personality tests. And I laughed my ass off when she told me this because I'm already thinking this myself. And I'm like, he's so good at telling on himself. He goes, I just answered the questions the way you would. And that is really how a very smart person can be a personality inventory. If you're fortunate enough to know somebody who's very well adjusted and you know them well, just think, how would Ashley answer this? Oh, she'd say this, she'd say this, and he's going to produce a normal profile. But that's fine. You can look good on paper, but if your behavior is clearly showing something different,
something's amiss, right?
Yeah, it's not a be-all, end-all determinant of what's going on with somebody. But he had become, I think, increasingly brazen in his behaviors because there's that part of his mind that thinks that he's invincible. And I think he was starting to panic and realize that that hearing very well may happen. He was trying to get Ashley's phone. He's like, oh, well, I'll take it to repair your cracked screen. She's like, no, that's okay. I'm thinking, oh my God, like, does he think she's an idiot? Like, he's obviously desperate to know what the hell's going on. I mean, she was really afraid of him and just literally holding on, looking forward to Monday. I think that, she was ready to just exhale when at least she was safe at the hotel, but she really wasn't going to feel safe anywhere. She felt like he would follow her, and he would have. He told me that he had people follow her. That's the other thing he's telling me during this 90-minute rant. I've hired private detectives. I put a tracker on her car. He had somebody park outside her mom's house when she had a gentleman friend over there to see what time he left. Tells me this guy's a despicable, low-caliber human being. He lives in a cinder block house. I'm like, that's what makes you a deplorable human being? Wow, I know a lot of deplorable human beings then. But he followed her. He said he had people following her, and I think she really knew that if he wasn't waiting outside of Faith's office, he'd have somebody else doing it. And I don't know exactly what went down on Sunday, but what I do know is there is absolutely no way. There is no way in hell she could have done anything to hurt anybody unless her life was in imminent danger right in that moment. My biggest fear for Ashley was that she wouldn't protect herself if she could, that she would just lay down. She's one of those people I'd be terrified if he said sit down in that chair and was ready to tie her up, that she would sit down. You never let anyone tie you up. Like frickin', I'd rather die in a struggle trying to defend myself than be slowly tortured. She was so afraid of challenging him because, again, he could take Emerson. The night before, Saturday night, she was texting me, oh my God, he wouldn't leave. Emerson picked up his shoes, brought them to him and said, go, Dad. This is why she never wanted him in the house. Once he got in, she'd never get him out. It's like a cockroach infestation.
Right.
Go, Daddy, go. He became aggressive with Emerson.
What happened Saturday night exactly?
Saturday night, the night before,
Yeah.
The 26th, I guess it was, he came over to move furniture in the pod. Well, then he comes in, he takes off his shoes, he gets comfortable. She's like, okay, I got to get Emerson ready to bed, see you later. He wouldn't freaking leave. Emerson is highly anxious, brings him the shoes. Go home, Daddy, bye. He's pissed at her. Ashley gets in between them like she was a wreck. She was like shaking. He would not freaking leave. And then the next day, oh, I'm coming over. And this is another thing he would do. He would call at 2. Oh, I'm on my way over. He wouldn't show up until 7. As soon as he started helping to move stuff, that was like his thing. Or even if he was coming over, even before that, if he was just coming over to pick her up to take her to dinner. Oh, I'll be there at 5. He'd come at like 6:30.
To keep her there waiting.
And to keep her waiting and to keep her like dreading.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's not a stupid man. He knew obviously she wasn't really going to reconcile with him. I mean, it was sad because he pretended to be someone different than he was when she married him. So all along he knew she couldn't really love him.
Right.
She loved who she wanted him to be. So I think the whole time he felt very threatened in the relationship, as do most men who have this pattern of coercive control. They pretend to be Prince fucking Charming. They get married. They now possess this person. But they don't like who they are, and they don't think she'll like who he is. And then they get mad, and it creates this cycle of violence.
Did, in your conversation, how many times do you think you've actually seen Ashley altogether?
Seen her physically altogether?
Yeah, just
gosh.
conversated with her about the ongoings between her and Douglas.
We've had regular text message and phone call communication. I've seen her in person a few times. I mean, she'd stop by the office to make payments on the eval because I let her have a payment plan. I ended up actually refunding her money because I said, this isn't going to do you any good with CPS. I feel bad taking payment, especially because I knew financially she was strapped. But she'd stop by. I've probably seen her since I finished this. I've seen her every day since the shooting.
Okay.
I really just wanted to make sure
How's she
was
doing?
okay.
She doing okay, or?
She's doing she's a well-adjusted person. She's doing as okay as can be expected, but she was horribly traumatized by everything that happened. Nightmares, unable to sleep. I mean, she's having, I think, the normal reaction that someone would in a highly traumatic situation.
Right.
And a highly stressful situation. They took her daughter away, which
and I explained to her attorneys that has nothing to do with us at all.
I know.
We don't even have we don't make recommendations. It's nothing to do with.
I understand that, but I'm just saying in terms of just her heartbreak and her stress and knowing that, like, I mean, she and Emerson have a great relationship, so she knows it's got to be hard for Em. But I mean, I know her very well. She's been so consistent in how she is. You meet people, they can be a certain way, but then you get to know them and you think, oh, they're a little different than how they were when I met them. Not necessarily bad, but different, but not, she's very consistent. And there's somebody I was looking at some of the online commentary about her from the ballet community after this stuff made the papers. And somebody said, maybe it was the Facebook page for the ballet. Actually, I think it had nothing to do, I don't remember. But someone said, Ashley's the kind of person who would scoop a fly out of a swimming pool and put it outside. And that nails it. She's very kind. She's very tenderhearted. all she just wanted was for Doug to not be dangerous. She's like, we can get divorced. I can share time. He doesn't have to like me. I just want him to not be dangerous. Is there anything we can do for him to not be dangerous? I think it was so hard for her to even entertain the thought that, no, maybe he might always be a problem and a protective order really is necessary.
Right.
Okay. She just wanted somebody to rescue her. She just wanted the system to do its job and to protect her. She only could have hurt somebody if real survival fear hijacked the process the way it's designed to do.
In the amount of time that you've known Ashley and you guys have talked, whether it be here at the office or on the phone or somewhere else, had she ever spoken about any violence between her and Doug?
Yeah, he's pushed her, he's shoved her,
Okay,
he's
pushed her,
tripped
shoved her. Okay.
The kind of stuff that if it left a superficial bruise, you can explain it away with something
Right.
else. I mean, he's never given her a beat down.
Okay. Did he ever hit her, slapped her, anything else? Or
He's
pulled her hair? I mean, anything at all?
I don't know if he's pulled her hair. He's grabbed her. He's pushed her. He's pinned her down and wouldn't let her get up.
Okay.
He locked her in a closet.
Okay.
A couple of different occasions. Pinned her down, shoved her into walls, up in her face. Breaking things. Like he would take something and smash. He'd pin her against the wall and break something, like he's gonna hit her in the face.
Break it on the wall.
Break
Right.
it on the wall.
Just to intimidate her.
To get the terror
Right.
without the bruise.
Would he admit? Did he mention any of that at all?
Oh,
Or he would
no.
do that, just kind of gloss that over completely.
The only thing I ever saw where he even indicated that he ever did anything inappropriate.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Mark Sessoms got it out of him in the deposition that he fired a gun.
Right.
Well, she just wouldn't shut up. Really? You fire a gun because you throw
Yeah.
it and then you fire it? And that's also bullshit. Ashley is not the I wouldn't shut up type. She just was trying to understand something.
Right.
And I'm reading that deposition and it's like, my life was a mess. I had a daughter who was acting up and a wife who wanted to talk about it. Your teenage daughter's acting up and your wife wants to talk about it, and that means your life is a disaster and you have to throw and fire a gun. That's called life. That's called being married and having a family.
Right.
I mean, I have kids. Yeah, there are days when my kid was acting up and my husband wanted to talk about it. I never thought to go get a gun. Like, what the fuck?
Right. Yeah, that's kind of an odd thing to.
It's bizarre. I mean, I'm reading through that depo and I'm like, oh my God. But yeah, he did acknowledge doing that. The only thing I ever saw was there was an email to a couple of pastors that I guess he wanted to do counseling with. He very much wanted faith-based counseling because a faith-based therapist is not going to encourage you to get divorced as
Right.
likely as a more secular-minded therapist might. So that was always his first choice, and then he could pretend how good and godly he is or whatever. But he said something about, well, there was so much stress and I guess I just kind of lost my mind. He made a couple of references to, losing my mind or, I just had a breakdown. But he never identified or took responsibility for a specific behavior to anybody. Now, in some text communications to Ashley, he acknowledged putting the tracker on her car. He told me he tracked her once. He didn't claim he currently was.
Right.
He admitted to showing up at the restaurant or waterworks at the club where she worked. He put that and harassing her there. He didn't say it as harassing when he was telling me about it. Oh, I wanted to make sure she was okay. Or I wanted to see who was talking to her. Well, it's none of your business who's talking to her. Acting like that was protective rather than controlling.
Right.
But no, he never documented or took responsibility for any of the physical aggression. I mean, if anything, he vehemently denied that. And he admitted in the deposition, I think, to hitting the dog.
Okay.
But no, he did not ever. And again, that's consistent with the coercive, pervasive power and control dynamic. They don't take responsibility for their behavior. And when I do the 29-week batterer intervention counseling with people, that is always the objective.
Right.
And granted, I'll get guys in this class sometimes, they don't have that coercive mentality. There was a fight and they did something stupid, or maybe their wife pushed first and they pushed back.
Right.
Someone called the cops and someone was going to jail, so they
Right.
took the bullet, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Right.
I mean, there's like no freaking way my husband would ever allow me to go to jail. If I hit him and someone called the cops, he would say he started it.
Right.
Just because that's how a lot of guys are.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys I'm not worried about taking responsibility per se, but the ones who really are coercive, chronic mindset of this is what I do. I want the power, I want the control. If they don't take responsibility for their behavior and identify that dynamic, they cannot successfully say they completed a batterer's intervention class. The biggest issue is they take no responsibility for their behavior. And he takes zero. He denies. He blames her. A big thing he used to do was if they got into a argument, like if he didn't like something she said, or they disagreed on something, he would scream at her and make her put on her pajamas, get back in bed, and start the day over. When he yelled at her, pushed her, shoved her, threw things, broke things, he would say, "It's your fault. You made me do it." Wow, I must be pretty damn powerful if I could make somebody do these things. If he would acknowledge the behavior to her, but then say, "Well, you made me do it." Just like he made her shoot the gun through the ceiling. Did you see that deposition?
I read the report. Yes.
Okay.
It's. I think he actually admitted to the firing of the firearm as
but
well. So.
She made him do it.
Right.
And that is the pattern of that chronic abuse. And the problem is that it escalates. It gets worse over time. You probably, and I don't know if you guys ever heard about this case in Florida. It was a very long time ago. It was probably 25 years ago. And I lived in New York at the time. And it was everything front page. Joel Steinberg, do you know who he is? The Joel Steinberg head and Nussbaum case. Joel Steinberg was an attorney in New York City. If you Google it, all this shit will come up.
Right.
He and his longtime common law wife, they were never married. Her name was Hedda Nussbaum. They illegally adopted 2 children. He beat their daughter, 6 years old, into a coma after smoking crack one night. The interesting part of this story, again, upstanding New York City successful professionals. She was an editor at Random House. She ended up getting fired for missing too much work. He was a very controlling, very abusive man. If you were to see photographs of her at the beginning of their relationship and what she looked like testifying in court, she was given immunity in the death of the child for testifying against him.
Right.
The child was slowly dying and she finally called 911, but he told her, "No, you're going to sit here and smoke crack with me." And people couldn't understand, how do you sit there and smoke crack? But they did not understand the pattern of coercive control. Her face was disfigured from years and years of him beating her. They were together well over 10 years, probably 15 or 20 or something. I don't know what the statute is, common law in New York, but it was a long time. That type of abuse that existed in the Benefields' marriage, that escalates over time. And I saw it with Emerson. The abuse towards Emerson was getting worse very rapidly. The abuse towards Ashley was escalating over time. He's not somebody who's, if his world is falling apart, is going to just happily jump off the skyway and leave everybody else alone. Oh no. Because she's his possession. If she leaves him, well, nobody else is going to get to have her. That's his. And I'm very, very confident that there's a very good likelihood that he'd planned on killing her for a little while. And there's no way in hell that she would have shot him unless she fully believed that her life was in danger. And for Ashley to believe that when she always believes the best in people, I don't even want to imagine what the hell was going on.
When I know you say you've talked to her pretty much every day since.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to figure out exactly what was going on that day prior to everything going on. Did she kind of give you any indication what was going on at the house or why he was there? And
it was the usual, I'm going to come by and we'll put this stuff in the truck kind of thing.
Okay. So they were loading up the U-Haul that was there. I know there was a U-Haul and there was a pod too.
Yeah.
So okay, so they were loading up
like
the U-Haul.
the heavier stuff that because he was like all ready to take off to Maryland.
Right.
Yeah, I mean it was just that kind of thing. That's what he'd been doing for the last few days was, coming over to do that. But then of course again, not wanting to leave, showing his presence, exerting his dominance.
Right.
So she said he had become increasingly rough. Like, he'd pick up a box to move it, pass her in the hallway, body check her, or slam it
Right.
into her. And you know what she says to me? She's like, well, if it was, anyone else, I would think it was an accident. I said, Ashley, examine that. If you and I were moving stuff around, hypothetically, how many times do you think I would actually accidentally bump into you? Maybe once.
Right.
Every time he passed her, and this was
He's
going
like throwing his elbow at her. That kind
throwing
of
an
thing.
elbow at her
Okay.
or shoving into her, like a body check kind of.
I got you.
And he was doing it more, and he was doing it harder.
And he was doing it that day?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, he did, because she said he scratched her with a box.
Okay.
Maybe it was that day or the day before. I don't remember, but he was
Did she
definitely being rough.
Did she say where? I'm sorry. Where he scratched her exactly?
He shoved a box into her at one point, and I don't recall what day that was, but she did have
Oh,
a
okay.
scratch. She had a scratch on her rib cage.
Yeah, I think she showed me that. Yeah, on
Yeah.
her side. Okay. Did she happen to tell you what kind of led up to this? Like what the catalyst was that just really set this whole thing in motion that night?
I don't know exactly.
Okay.
I don't know exactly. I would hypothesize it was probably pretty sudden.
Okay.
I mean, obviously the buildup has been chronic and ongoing,
Right.
but I suspect, I don't know, I suspect he just made a move. That he did something, that he said something. I don't know what that is, and I have not wanted to ask her about it.
Okay.
I just don't think it's healthy for her to rehearse it and rehash it. Just that's kind of my mental health person kicking
Right.
in. That, I think she just needs to let her mind process what happened so she can be okay and go on. And, and I know her attorney has, told her not to make a statement. So I'm not encouraging her to do anything. I'm just being supportive.
Right, and that's why by talking to you, we're hoping that there's something that can kind of give us an indication as to essentially what you're telling us. You know what I mean? So.
All I know is he's become increasingly aggressive. He was there. He'd been shoving her and body checking her. What exactly happened in the minute before,
Right.
2 minutes before, I can't tell you what that was. All I do know is whatever it was, her life was in danger. Her very safety was in danger. I don't know if he was armed at that time. I don't know if he said something. I don't know if he indicated that he was going to do something. But he obviously did something that made it very, very clear that she was going to be hurt, killed, something. Because otherwise it's impossible that she would have shot him. It's just impossible. The Ashley that I know would never shoot somebody just because they were pissing her off.
Okay.
And just, we have a lot of, I like that because we have a lot of leeway because you're an expert in the, this field where, in normal people it's, what did you see? Don't tell me what you're thinking, what you see. So I'm glad we get to see what actually the insight is. And I ask this because we're going to be asked this here. What, as a professional, what are the chances that from the beginning that she's just lied to you from the beginning? That all these are lies? Is that even a possibility?
It's absolutely impossible.
Okay.
I've been able to cross-reference and verify everything.
Obviously, it's been so long, and Doug's made some statements. So
Yeah.
that's why I'm asking.
And this is that question is one of the things that I had been concerned about Judge Moreland thinking in an injunction hearing.
Right.
Which was why when, through my initial few days of the evaluation and the testing and the week of talking to collaterals, I said this is one of these cases that I need to continue to stay in touch with because otherwise I'm going to hear, well, it's been 6 months since your eval. How do you really know?
That question is going to be asked.
Yeah.
It's like it was going to be asked with the hearing. It's going to be asked to us.
Yeah.
Well, what's the chance that she came in there in April and she's just been making up this story from the beginning? That's why we want to know is you're the professional. That part of it, we're not professionals at, so that's why we got to do it for you.
Think about how much work she'd really be putting into this story.
And that's why I asked how many times you'd seen her. I mean, that's not like I met you one time and you know.
And think about all the people involved.
Right.
Okay. Dr. Jason Quintal. Doug got this idea, and she was excited about this because he's very good at trauma treatment. He and I, over the years, I've referred some people to him that I would have been a conflict of interest to work with, or I thought you can use the Jason touch. Somebody gave Doug his name. He said, he's going to help make our marriage better. And I said to Ashley, oh my God, this is perfect. Because maybe he can get inside Doug's head and make him a little bit less dangerous. I don't think there was a chance in hell of that happening. I don't think Doug ever intended to be less dangerous. I think that he was just, again, hoping that some kind of marriage counseling would keep
Right.
Ashley in the game. But between him, Dr. Forrest, Dr. Broder, the ER people at All Children's, Emerson's pediatrician, the pediatric dentist, everybody who knows them sees the exact same thing. And it's not just Ashley is saying things, they're observing the same things. And then when you cross-reference things, like how could Ashley have made up that prescription?
Right.
It just didn't make any sense. So there's too many factors, too many variables that would have been impossible for her to be lying about. And it's a great question, because my thing is, I don't like looking stupid.
Right.
And so I do a lot of forensic evaluations, and I am very meticulous about cross-referencing things because I don't want to make an assumption. I just did this eval on this guy who allegedly has not filled his Adderall prescription in 6 months because, well, my wife says I'm crazy on it, and being with my kids is more important. So what do? I go on E-Force. No, he hasn't filled it in 6 months. Okay. That doesn't mean he's not using it.
Right.
Or using stimulants.
Right.
So I get a drug test on him as well. Let's cross-reference. Because if the drug test said no methamphetamines, but he was picking up the Adderall, okay, maybe he's not taking it, but why is he picking it up?
Right.
Who the fuck is he selling it to?
Right.
So you want to just dot every I and cross the T. And I think that everybody who has spent time with Ashley has done that very thing. Everything lines up.
Right.
There's never been anything that it's like, well, this is a little sketchy, or I don't understand this. Or when I have had a question, I've said, Ashley, well, what about this? Like the sworn deposition thing. I'm like, why were you deposed? I was never deposed. Oh, well, gee, that explains it. Faith, was she deposed for anything? She's like, no. No record of any depositions of her. Okay. So no, there's no way she could have been making this up. And why? What's in it for her?
I'm not saying it is.
Yeah.
You know, it's just.
But it's a question I would ask. Like,
Yeah.
if somebody is going to go through such lengths to make up all this shit.
What's the end game?
Yeah, and I don't. Were you able to get hold of Dr. Broder's report?
Yes, Dr.
we
Broder's
got-
the one that filed with CPS. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we had. It actually got filed the Saturday prior to this happening.
Okay.
So
yeah,
it just got
right.
put in the system that Saturday, the
Okay.
day before.
And and I don't, the things that he likely cited, these are things she couldn't possibly make up.
Right.
You can't make up a child's behavior. When a kid who's normally animated and talking sits there
Right.
and just stares into space like a zombie and is completely non-responsive after spending a day with dad, I can't make a 2-year-old sit
No.
like that.
No, me either.
I know the feeling. I can't either.
So when you look at the whole picture and connect all the dots, and that's really what a good evaluation does,
Right.
it should have convergence validity. Everything should come together and the pieces should fit. And the piece that, the puzzle, the total picture when everything comes together that I know is that, number one, there was nothing mentally wrong with this woman. Number two, this was a chronic pattern of family abuse. And number three, there is no way on earth that she would hurt anybody unless her back brain organs grabbed the reins as God designed for them to do when our life is in danger. And she protected herself.
Something we're sitting here talking, I wanted to go back to the safety plan. I had a question about that.
Yes.
So I know you guys were waiting for the court date to find out what the judge's decision was going to be on the injunction. But her plan was to, on Monday, go to the lawyer's office, sneak out the back, get in a rental car, and someone was going to drive her to the hotel that you guys had set
Yes.
up for her in
And
St.
she was
Pete.
going to stay there until Thursday, I believe, was the date of
Yeah,
the
it was
hearing.
Wednesday or Thursday. I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember which it was.
Okay.
But
And then someone was
she'd
going to
be
drive her
picked up,
back down.
brought back to the courthouse.
Okay.
Because they're in person.
Mhm.
And now the original injunction was to protect Emerson. The attorney was going to file another one for her, or try to modify it. And if not, then the goal was, okay, we all wait at the courthouse, get it filed real quick, and get her in front of somebody for that,
Right.
Okay.
and get that taken care of. And hopefully it was going to be granted. And also we thought, well,
Right.
Judge Moreland, because I think the hearing was at 1:30, that would give her plenty of time to order Brad Broder's report. Because she could have ordered it immediately.
Yeah.
And she could have gotten it within, I mean, if it was emailed over, she could have gotten it
Couple
within
minutes,
seconds,
yeah.
paused for, 30 minutes, read through it, and then, that could have influenced her decision.
Was there what was going to happen if, or had it even been discussed, what was going to happen if for some reason Judge Moreland continued on the path that she had already kind of set down in the prior,
Denied.
if she just denied everything? Yeah, what was the plan at that point?
The
to
plan,
keep her safe and
the plan at that point, if she denied it, was that we would reshelter her somewhere, either bring her back to the same hotel or figure out something else. Hope
Okay.
Services knew what was going on. Kim may have been working on a plan B, but the plan at that point was that she was going to have to stay out of the way,
Right.
and essentially let his wrath resettle, and then legally, I think her attorney had a plan B going on,
Okay.
and I'm not crystal clear on what that was. My mind was very focused on, let's just
Right.
make sure that we get her out of the way. But yeah, the idea was regardless of the outcome of that,
Okay.
she'd have to be kept safe.
Yeah, I know Faith told me a little bit about it. That's why I was looking for clarification from somebody that kind of
Yeah.
knew, it seems like, the ins and outs of everything. So,
Ironically, though, if he lost, I mean, not if he lost, if he won,
right.
she actually would have been safer. He would have been pissed that she went through with it, but she would have been safer in the sense of, at least immediately, of, see, you poor little thing.
He would have felt validated.
He would have felt validated, number one, and then it would have been another control thing. See, Judge Moreland sees how crazy you are.
Again. Right.
Again. I don't know why, God's crown jewel, you just can't accept the fact that nobody wants to hurt you. Clearly you need more counseling for this paranoid problem. He would have used it to patronize her, but he would have felt empowered. So he may not have needed to hurt her in the immediate, because it would have been a victory.
Okay.
As fucked up as that sounds.
Yeah, no, I get
Yes.
it. Just real quick, let me take you back to that night, just as a witness, less as a doctor part of it. How did you find out about that this happened?
I was
showed up out
walking my
there.
dog,
Okay,
and I left my phone at the house. I came back and I saw 2 missed calls from her mom.
right.
And I think Faith Brown had called me. She said she was on her way to the sheriff's department.
Okay.
And I said, what happened? And she said, Doug is in an ambulance. Ashley's on her way to the police station. And I said, whoa.
Yeah.
Because I would have expected to hear Ashley's dead. I mean, when I saw 2
Right.
missed calls from Militia, my thought was, oh my God, he fucking killed her.
Right.
And then when Faith called and said she was on her way to the police station and Doug was in an ambulance, I was like, wow. And I can't say that I was sorry to hear that that was the outcome
Right.
rather than the other.
Right.
But I mean, her mother was fucking freaked out. I mean,
Yeah.
she saw the police cars and she thought Ashley was dead. Everybody thought Ashley was dead. Which, again,
Yeah.
how do we know she's not making it up? Why would people think that she was dead if they saw police
Right.
cars outside her house?
And I want to tell you, that night I want to apologize how a little bit we had to push her. I had to push her because I could tell you outside that they were going to take that child
Mm-hmm.
and away from mom too, just away from the situation altogether. Without mom giving that statement, that's what was going to happen. And
I actually
Me-
believed you, and I
me-
didn't believe anybody.
right, me knowing what was going to happen and what had already happened, that was not the right thing for that child.
Oh no, I know.
So that's why I had to
You were
kind
the
of push
only
you out of the
one
way. 'cause
that
they
I
were-
actually believed had some credibility. I don't trust those
Okay.
CPS people.
I understand.
They have not heard Ashley from the outset. I'm not saying they're horrible, evil people. I think they suck at investigating this. They drank Doug's Kool-Aid. They listened to one piece of evidence that had nothing to do with the present day situation. They made up their mind, and then they became determined, I believe, to defend that position. They're still defending that position. You should hear them in dependency court. It's ludicrous. But regardless, and I didn't even know who the hell you were.
Right, I understand.
But my gut said, okay, I think this guy is actually telling us the truth. Go ahead and talk.
Yeah, because I had nothing to do with that other stuff.
Right.
All I had is what mom told me.
Yeah.
And she told me, a little bit about CPS and
Yeah.
the problem with it. So when they said, hey, we're going to have to shelter this kid, it's like, I've been to these things before, and they go
Oh,
to
no,
mom.
no.
That's what they do.
Right.
But if she doesn't talk, they're not going to give it to her.
Right.
And it's like,
The
Okay, we
irony,
can't
and
do
I think
that.
the part
So-
that just had her so distressed, was that they've been begging for someone to protect Emerson for so long. And now, for the first time in her life, the kid
Someone
was
steps
actually
in.
safe.
right.
It's like, the friggin' boar has been coming in and attacking the foal.
And now for the first
And
time,
the
we're,
mayor.
we're saying that we want to protect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I
then
understand.
somebody shoots the friggin' boar, and it's like, oh, let's take the foal away from the mayor.
Yeah.
That's some stupid farming.
Yeah, exactly. So.
So, no, I actually believed you.
Right, I just-
You were the only,
I know, it was-
and I know
It was a
idea
little
who you
stressful
were.
out there, but it was just kind of like, yeah, this has to be done, unfortunately. So.
No, I called her back, and I was, I'm like, are you okay? Is Emerson okay? Because she didn't like to leave Ashley alone.
Right. I
The
understand
only
that.
reason she took Emerson out of the house was Emerson started crying when Ashley said, Doug said he's on his way over.
Yeah.
Because he got in her face or grabbed her or did something the night before when she brought him the shoes. So she didn't want to see Daddy. So she was like, I'll take her out for a little while. And I guess she was having fun at the park. But yes, it was good that obviously the child wasn't there.
Sure, very good.
The other side of it also is that who knows? This was clearly opportunity for him.
Yeah.
It definitely gave him a window of opportunity with no witnesses to whatever he was going to do. So I don't know. I mean, I wish I could have been a spider on the wall. I'd be able to tell you more, obviously. But knowing the dynamic and knowing Ashley as a person,
There's no doubt in your mind.
there's no doubt in
Okay.
my mind. No doubt in my mind that her life was in absolute danger at that point in time. Or certainly whatever he was doing was enough to fully persuade her that it was. Even somebody who was inclined to believe the best in him. I'm
Yeah.
absolutely certain of that.
And based on everything we've talked about, it seems your understanding of what Doug might have believed that night was that this injunction was going to get canceled on Wednesday or Thursday.
That was what she
And-
told him.
Right, but
Was that what
that's
he
kind of what
believed?
we think he might have understood, and then that they were going to be moving as a family to Maryland.
Right. Yeah, the
But-
Maryland thing had come up months before because of that is the site of his job in Maryland outside of DC, the new
Right.
government job he was getting with all of his alleged top security clearance that he was going to be re-upping.
Right.
And when they began talking about that, because he said he could essentially work from anywhere, she started thinking, you know what, moving to Maryland might be a good idea because I could potentially get somewhere with the system there.
Right.
They take domestic violence more seriously there as a
Right.
state in general.
Right.
And she didn't already have child protective services in Maryland, thinking that she was a whack bar.
Right.
So she's like, Emerson could potentially be safer, plus they had family support. But as far as her, I think they both knew, because again, Doug's not stupid.
Right.
Because even Ashley said to him, well, you're not going to live with us. Well, Mom and I will have Mom's house, and you can get an apartment,
Okay.
and we can have counseling there. It was never on the table that they would move together.
Right.
It
They would
was
just
we
be
will
in the
both
same
move to Maryland.
city.
We'll
Okay.
be in the same
Gotcha.
vicinity.
Okay.
And we can keep working on this reconciliation. Her plan would have been to file an injunction there
Okay.
because she would have had Broder's report, which was something that she told me Brad shared with her, that you will be able to use this report anywhere to protect yourself and your daughter. So she's thinking between Broder's extensive report, between my report, between anything else that she had, that
Right.
it would be much easier in a state like Maryland that gives protective injunctions much easier to get one once the jurisdiction in terms of family law was changed. But even then, you don't necessarily have to change that to
Right.
get an injunction. So she really saw it as an opportunity to get protection. And, there was just more family and friends there. So during the difficult Doug stuff, she just had more resources. But again, that was another thing that was grossly misrepresented by the DCF. Oh, she failed to protect. She was going to move back to Maryland with him. No, she wasn't.
Right.
Did you ever ask her about this?
Right.
No, they didn't ask her shit. So.
Well, because we obviously can't talk to her right
Yeah,
now. That's
you
why
guys
we're
can talk
trying
to
to
her.
find
Yeah.
out exactly
Yeah.
what the status of that
Yeah.
was, because we do want to know, because it is important.
Right.
No, but even Mom told him.
You know.
She told him that night that it was together but separate
Right.
at the same time, but
Right.
not together.
Well, and here's the sketchy
Yeah.
thing. Doug never bothered to get an apartment.
Hmm.
And he dropped that on her, like, literally a day or two before. Maybe a few days before. Oh, well, I didn't have time to find an apartment. So, I'll just stay with you guys and I'll fix up your mom's house. Again, that I'm going to be in your
Yeah.
space. You're never going to get away from me. I'm going to control you. This is someone who wasn't allowed to go to Publix by herself when they lived in South Carolina. So he's making his coercive agenda very, very clear. She's saying to herself, there's no freaking way this is going to happen. And meanwhile, this injunction hearing is coming, which
Right.
was not off the docket.
Right.
And I think he was becoming a little panicky. That's, again, just a hypothesis. I hadn't spoken to him since.
Right.
But my only communication with him is through reading the text that he sent to her.
Right.
All those very thinly veiled threats and insinuations surrounded with the emojis and the kissies. And I'm just like, oh my God.
You said something earlier about like Doug when you spoke with him. The one time you did talk to him, you had the 90-minute conversation. Obviously, it was over the phone, right?
Yes.
And it wasn't recorded.
Unless he recorded it.
Unless,
but I don't
unless
know.
you recorded. Were any of the sessions with Ashley ever recorded?
I don't know. I'd have to check.
Okay.
I'm trying
I was
to
just
remember
wondering
if I
because that just, one more thing that we can say
Sometimes
that
I
we.
record interviews, sometimes I don't.
Okay.
And actually it was 6 months. I don't remember, but I'll check my recordings.
Okay. Trying to think if there's anything else. Is that for us
If you
or?
want to take this, you're welcome to.
I appreciate it. That way we can just add it to the file just to show,
Yeah.
that we did come talk to you.
If you have any questions after, you're welcome to give me a call.
Thank you. And just out of curiosity, and like I said, he said there's some questions that are going to be asked, and we have to clarify them. You obviously told us why you showed up there that night. How did you come to first see Ashley? Was she recommended, or did somebody?
When
did she just
when Kim
Google
Donatelli
psychologist
from
or?
Hope Services was at a staffing meeting at CPS
Okay.
because there was an open investigation because of all the reports that were coming in
Right.
about Emerson by credible professionals that they thought she was telling lies to, and they were
Right.
reporting because she had to. But regardless, Kim, I found out later from Kim.
Donatelli, right?
Yeah, Donatelli.
Okay.
That during that staffing, they were saying, well, we should get a mental health evaluation on her
Okay.
because they thought she was making it up or that she was trying to alienate.
Right.
And then Kim told her that they said that, and she said, well, I could give you some referrals. So she gave her my name and a couple of others.
Okay.
And she ended up here. She maybe even asked her attorney if she knew any of these people, and I don't know who the
And that's
other
the first
options
time you
were.
met any of the family.
That was the first time I ever met her. I never, had any acquaintance with her until then.
Because of course, there's his family, everybody else still a part of this investigation, and we have to talk, and we want to just be able to say that we have a clear understanding of everybody's involvements and relationships and roles and this whole ongoing of incidents.
Yeah.
Essentially, that's why we ask, because we don't want them to say,
No,
oh,
I never met her until the day she walked in here
Okay.
for her evaluation.
And had you ever met her on a social event, or was it
No,
only professional?
only professional. We had no
Okay.
mutual friends, nobody.
Okay.
I won't do a forensic eval. I'm very reluctant to even treat somebody if
Right.
there's like a common person.
Right.
And,
I don't want any conflicts
Yeah.
of interest. I
Right.
don't-
and like I said, we've gone through. I just want these are things that, of course, the other side is going to
Well, yeah,
try to
those are-
say, and we
yeah.
want to go ahead and have an answer for it
Right.
when it's asked. That's all.
Yeah.
Because maybe some things have been asked already, and we're just trying to defeat that argument, essentially, or to have an answer for that argument.
If
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no,
So,
totally. I
um,
was never acquainted with her until this case.
Okay. And your relationship with her was only professional.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Like I said, no mutual friends, never went out and hung out. The only time we ever
Okay.
talked was about her life.
Okay. How long would it take you to find out if you did have any recordings of any of the interviews or, I guess, conversations with her?
Oh, by late this afternoon.
Okay.
I'll actually have time to check.
Okay. Did I give you my cell phone number or my office number? Because I'll give you my cell phone number if you
Is
just
it
want
the
to let me know.
725 one?
It is. That's my cell phone. So if you call me, that will go right to me.
Okay.
Okay. I appreciate it. Thank you for seeing us.
You're
And
very
Thank you.
welcome.
sorry, it wasn't painless. Or painful, I should
Actually,
say. But
Pretty painless.
see.
I mean, the facts are the facts.
Right.
Yes,
That's what
ma'am.
you do.
Oh. Well, we do appreciate it. Thank you very much. And like I said, I hope she's doing all right. And obviously,
It was very good meeting you.
thank you, ma'am.
This door?
Or the next
One
one.
more down
One
and
more.
one to the left.
All right. Thank you, ma'am.
You're very welcome.
I'm walking in somebody else's office.
She's never there.
Have a good one.
And that was the interview with Dr. Barbara Russell. Present was Detective Dickerman and myself, Detective Warren, concluding the interview at 10:57 a.m.
I want to thank everybody for watching, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for being here. See you next time. Mentor Lawyer. Bye-bye.